In the heart of Northern Ireland, where the line between war and peace was often blurred, one name stands out among the shadows: Colin Duffy. Born in 1968 into a Catholic family in Lurgan, County Armagh, Colin Duffy's life is a story of rebellion, survival, and controversy. From his early years, he was shaped by a conflict that defined his homeland, a conflict known to the world as the Troubles. This period, marked by sectarian violence, political tension, and deep-rooted cultural division, left an indelible mark on a young boy who would grow to become one of the most polarizing figures in Northern Ireland's modern history. Lurgan, like much of Northern Ireland, was a town divided not just by invisible lines between Catholic and Protestant communities, but also by a history of bloodshed and resistance. Duffy grew up against a backdrop of bombings, street patrols by British soldiers, and the constant fear that violence could erupt at any moment. The early 1970s and 1980s in Northern Ireland were times when every young person had to choose a side, or risk becoming a victim of both. For young Colin, there were no neutral grounds. From a young age, Colin Duffy was drawn into the whirlwind of Republican ideology. The Irish Republican Army was not just a militant organization, it was a movement that called to the youth of Catholic communities. Many saw it as the last line of defense against a state they felt was fundamentally hostile to their identity and rights. By his teenage years, Duffy had joined the Provisional IRA, and his involvement with Sinn Féin, the political wing of the Republican struggle, deepened his commitment to the cause. He became an outspoken advocate for Irish unity, a stance that would put him at odds with both British authorities and Loyalist paramilitaries. On March 7, 1990, Colin Duffy's life took a fateful and deadly turn. After signing bail at the Royal Ulster Constabulary Barracks in Lurgan, he left with fellow Republicans Sam Marshall and Tony McCoy. The three men were not ordinary citizens. They were known figures in the Republican movement, and their movements were closely watched. A short distance from the barracks, they were ambushed by masked gunmen from the Ulster Volunteer Force. Gunfire erupted in the cold night air, a chaotic explosion of violence that left Duffy and McCoy wounded and Sam Marshall dead on the pavement. Marshall's last words, "We were let out to be set up," echoed through the Republican community, raising suspicions of collusion between Loyalist paramilitaries and British security forces. Robin Jackson, a figure infamous in Loyalist paramilitary circles, loomed over the attack. Jackson, often referred to as the Jackal, had a reputation for being involved in some of the bloodiest episodes of the Troubles, yet he remained a free man. Witnesses later reported seeing someone matching Jackson's description near the barracks on a previous occasion when the three Republicans had signed bail. Despite the suspicions and allegations, no one was ever charged for Marshall's murder. The incident only deepened the distrust between communities and hardened the resolve of those like Duffy, who saw themselves as warriors in a long struggle for freedom. The ambush in 1990 was just the beginning of a decade of legal battles for Colin Duffy. In 1995, he was arrested and charged with the murder of former Ulster Defence Regiment soldier John Lynch. The case was a high-profile one, drawing intense media attention and public interest. The prosecution's case rested heavily on the testimony of Lindsay Robb, a UVF member who claimed to have insider knowledge of the murder plot. However, the reliability of Robb's testimony came into question when he was later arrested in Scotland for gun-running activities. The collapse of Robb's credibility led to Duffy's acquittal, a moment that many Republicans hailed as a victory against what they saw as a corrupt judicial system. During these legal battles, Duffy's defense was managed by Rosemary Nelson, a prominent human rights lawyer known for taking on cases others would not touch. Nelson became a target herself, receiving threats and intimidation from loyalists and security forces alike. In 1999, her car was bombed and she was killed. Her death shocked Northern Ireland and cast a dark shadow over the justice system's handling of cases related to the Troubles. For Duffy, the loss of Nelson was a personal and political blow, a stark reminder of the dangers faced by those who challenge the status quo. Just 2 years after his release from prison, Duffy faced new accusations. In 1997, he was charged with the murders of 2 RUC constables, John Graham and David Johnston, who were shot while on foot patrol in Lurgan town centre. The evidence was largely circumstantial, relying on witness testimony and forensic speculation, and as with his previous case, the charges were eventually dropped. For his supporters, this was another instance of a flawed system targeting an innocent man. For his detractors, it was a miscarriage of justice. As the new millennium dawned, Northern Ireland was slowly transitioning from conflict to peace, yet Duffy's name remained a constant in headlines. In March 2009, he was charged with involvement in the Masserine barracks shooting, where 2 British soldiers were killed while collecting pizzas from a delivery driver. The attack sent shockwaves through Northern Ireland, coming just days after the police service of Northern Ireland had issued warnings about a resurgence in dissident Republican activity. Duffy's trial was a spectacle, drawing intense media scrutiny and sparking heated debates about the fragility of peace in Northern Ireland. The prosecution's case largely relied on a trace of Duffy's DNA found on a latex glove discovered in a car linked to the scene. However, the defense successfully argued that the evidence was not conclusive enough to convict him. On January 20th, 2012, Duffy was acquitted. His co-accused, Brian Shivers, was initially found guilty, only to have his conviction overturned due to procedural errors and his terminal illness. The Masserine case did not mark the end of Duffy's public battles. On September 8, 2012, he gave a graveside oration for real IRA member Alan Ryan, who had been killed in Dublin. In his speech, Duffy described Ryan as a brave Irish Republican and fearless IRA volunteer, calling for continued resistance against what he termed foreign interference in our country. These words did not go unnoticed. They were seen as a provocative reminder that despite the peace process and political agreements, there remained a faction of hardline Republicans unwilling to abandon the armed struggle. Just 2 months after this oration, on November 2nd, 2012, Duffy was arrested again, this time in connection with the murder of prison officer David Black, who was ambushed on the M1 motorway between Lurgan and Portadown. The killing of Black, a high-profile attack on a member of the security services, reignited fears of a return to violence. Further charges followed in 2013, including allegations of being a member of the IRA and conspiring to possess firearms and explosives with intent to endanger life. As in previous cases, the evidence against Duffy was challenged by his defense team, and he was released on bail in February 2016, leaving a trail of unanswered questions and lingering suspicions. The shadow of the Troubles extended beyond Colin Duffy himself. His family too became deeply enmeshed in the conflict's legacy. His brothers, Paul and Damien, and his cousin Shane, faced their own charges of terrorism and related offences, though all were eventually acquitted. These cases reinforced the narrative of a family under siege, living in a society where political beliefs could turn loved ones into targets. Colin's sister-in-law, Mandy Duffy, also remains an active figure in the Republican scene through her work with Saurad, a political party representing the more militant wing of the Republican movement. Together, the Duffys symbolize a broader story of Northern Ireland, one where family, politics, and conflict are inextricably intertwined. To his supporters, Colin Duffy is a symbol of resistance and resilience. To his critics, he represents a more troubling era, an embodiment of a cycle of violence that left scars still visible in Northern Ireland today. His journey from a young boy in Lurgan to a figure repeatedly accused and acquitted of some of the most heinous acts during the Troubles is a testament to the complexities of justice, memory, and reconciliation in a place where history is never truly past. Colin Duffy's life is a story still being written. As Northern Ireland continues to navigate its fragile peace, Duffy's story remains a potent reminder of the deep-seated issues that still shape its society. The questions linger. Can a region so marred by conflict ever fully heal? Can figures like Duffy find a place in a peaceful future? And what does justice truly mean in a land where every story is shadowed by another? For decades, Colin Duffy has been both a symbol of resistance and a lightning rod for controversy. His life and legal battles reflect the broader struggles faced by Northern Ireland as it grapples with its past and seeks a path to a more peaceful future. Thomas "Slab" Murphy, born on August 26, 1949, is a name that resonates deeply in the annals of modern Irish history. Known as one of the most enigmatic and controversial figures of the Troubles, Murphy is believed to have been a key figure in the Provisional Irish Republican Army. His farm, straddling the border between County Armagh in Northern Ireland and County Louth in the Republic of Ireland, became the epicenter of his alleged operations. Accused of everything from orchestrating deadly attacks to leading a multi-million-pound smuggling empire, Murphy's life story is a complicated web of secrecy, rebellion, and crime. Today, we delve deep into the rise and fall of Thomas "Slab" Murphy, from his days as a feared Republican leader to his conviction for tax evasion. Thomas Murphy grew up in a turbulent time in Irish history, where politics and conflict were intertwined in daily life. Born into a family of staunch Republicans, Murphy and his two brothers were raised in an environment deeply connected to the Irish nationalist cause. The family farm, split between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, provided a unique geographical advantage. It was not just a home, but a strategic location that would later become pivotal in Murphy's alleged activities with the IRA. By the 1970s, Murphy was already deeply involved with the IRA South Armagh Brigade, a unit known for its military expertise and deadly efficiency. His rise to prominence within the organization was swift. His tactical mind and commitment to the Republican cause soon caught the attention of the IRA Army Council, which later elected him as the Chief of Staff. Murphy's influence grew as he took on a more central role in planning some of the most notorious attacks during the Troubles. One of the most infamous incidents linked to Murphy was the 1979 Warren Point ambush, where 18 British soldiers were killed in a meticulously planned attack. On that same day, the Mullaghmore bombing claimed the life of Louis Mountbatten, 1st Earl Mountbatten of Burma, along with 3 others, including 2 children. Both attacks sent shockwaves through Britain and Ireland and cemented Murphy's reputation as a formidable figure in the IRA's militant wing. Throughout the 1980s, Murphy allegedly played a key role in the IRA international operations. Reports suggest that he was deeply involved in smuggling arms into Ireland, orchestrating the importation of massive stockpiles of weapons from Libya. Adrian Hopkins, a skipper who ferried these weapons to the IRA, later testified that Murphy had personally met a Libyan agent in Greece and facilitated the unloading of arms upon arrival in Ireland. This operation was one of the most significant arms smuggling efforts in the IRA history and underscored Murphy's importance within the organization. Murphy's alleged IRA activities caught the attention of both the media and law enforcement. In 1987, he made headlines again, but this time in a courtroom. The Sunday Times accused him of directing an IRA bombing campaign in Britain. Infuriated by these claims, Murphy sued the paper for libel in Dublin, leading to one of the most sensational trials of the time. The trial was a high-stakes gamble for Murphy. If he won, it would clear his name and undermine the narrative of his deep involvement in IRA operations. However, the outcome did not favor him. The original verdict was overturned due to omissions by the judge, but a retrial also ended in failure for Murphy. During the retrial, several former IRA members, including Sean O'Callaghan and Eamonn Collins, along with members of the Guards, Irish Customs, and British Army, testified against him. Collins, who later wrote a book detailing his experiences, was brutally murdered near his home, a crime that many believe was a direct consequence of his testimony against Murphy. Despite Murphy's denials, the jury ruled that he was indeed an IRA commander and a smuggler, a verdict that forever tainted his public image. The Sunday Times doubled down on its assertions, publishing statements from Adrian Hopkins, who detailed Murphy's involvement in the arms smuggling operations from Libya. The trial exposed a dark and complicated side of Murphy's life, painting him as a central figure in both the IRA's militant and criminal activities. While Murphy's alleged involvement in the IRA's military operations was under scrutiny, his name was also increasingly associated with a vast smuggling empire. His farm on the border of Northern Ireland and the Republic became a hotspot for clandestine activities. In 2005, authorities in both the UK and Ireland launched coordinated raids against businesses linked to Murphy as part of an investigation by the British Assets Recovery Agency and the Irish Criminal Assets Bureau. Murphy was accused of running a smuggling operation that encompassed everything from fuel and cigarettes to grain and pigs. The BBC's Underworld Rich List estimated his fortune was up to £40 million, earned through a combination of illegal activities and silent or partial ownership in legitimate businesses. During the raids, officers discovered a purpose-built underground chamber near his home, believed to have been used by the IRA for interrogations, further fueling the image of Murphy as a man deeply embedded in both criminal and militant networks. In a rare public statement following the raids, Murphy denied any involvement in smuggling and asserted his commitment to the peace process. He claimed that he was merely a farmer and that he had been forced to sell property to cover legal fees after his failed libel case. However, these denials did little to quell public suspicion. The scale of the raids, which included the seizure of tankers, shotguns, cigarettes, and nearly €1 million in cash, suggested that Murphy was far more than a simple farmer. The major turning point came on March 9, 2006, when a massive operation involving police, soldiers, and customs officials from both sides of the border led to a series of dawn raids on Murphy's properties. The sheer scale of the operation underscored the seriousness with which authorities viewed Murphy's alleged activities. During the raid, they uncovered 4 diesel laundering facilities, networks of underground storage tanks, and seized a fleet of tankers, computers, and documents. The raids also had a significant political fallout. Sinn Féin President Gerry Adams, under pressure from both political and media circles, publicly defended Murphy, stating, "Tom Murphy is not a criminal. He's a good Republican and a key supporter of Sinn Féin's peace strategy." This stance drew sharp criticism, particularly from Northern Ireland's First Minister Arlene Foster, who labelled Murphy a criminal and pointed out that the people of South Armagh viewed him as such. Despite this, Murphy continued to enjoy support from segments of the Republican community. However, the mounting evidence against him could not be ignored. As investigations continued, it became clear that Murphy's empire was built not only on ideological grounds, but also on a vast and lucrative network of illicit operations. Murphy's criminal career took a dramatic turn when he was convicted not for terrorism or smuggling, but for tax evasion. Following a lengthy investigation by the Criminal Assets Bureau, a Dublin court found Murphy guilty on 9 charges of tax evasion in December 2015. The trial, which lasted 9 weeks, took place under anti-terrorist legislation due to fears that witnesses and jurors might be intimidated. Murphy was found guilty of failing to file tax returns on income derived from his cattle farming between 1996 and 2004. His defense claimed that he was a legitimate farmer, but the evidence presented showed otherwise. Documents, diaries, and ledgers found during the raids painted a different picture, one of a man deeply involved in undeclared financial dealings. In February 2016, Murphy was sentenced to 18 months in prison without any suspension of his term. he was immediately transferred to Portlaoise Prison, Ireland's highest security prison reserved for terrorists and serious gangland criminals. The severity of his imprisonment, under a heavily armed Guards and Irish Army escort, was a clear indication of the danger Murphy was still perceived to represent. Despite appealing his conviction in November 2016, Murphy's efforts were unsuccessful. The Court of Appeal dismissed his case on all grounds, affirming that his activities had indeed breached the law. By January 2017, Murphy was moved to a low-security prison, Lachen House, where he awaited his release in April 2018. Murphy's release in 2018 marked the end of a significant chapter, but his legacy remains controversial. For many, he embodies the complexities of the Troubles, a man who stood as a symbol of resistance for some, but as a ruthless criminal for others. His life story, marked by allegations of terrorism, smuggling and violent crime, raises questions about the blurred lines between political activism and organized crime in times of conflict. Reports suggest that Murphy had become disillusioned with the peace process in Northern Ireland, falling out with Sinn Féin and distancing himself from mainstream Republican politics. Some speculated that he might align with dissident groups opposed to the Good Friday Agreement, although no concrete evidence has emerged to confirm this. Murphy's life remains a stark reminder of the turbulent history of Northern Ireland and the Republic, where political ideology, crime and conflict have often intertwined. His conviction for tax evasion, while seemingly a mundane end for such a notorious figure, underscores the challenges authorities face in bringing powerful and secretive figures to justice. Thomas "Slab" Murphy remains one of the most enigmatic and divisive figures in recent Irish history. To his supporters, he is a committed Republican who dedicated his life to the cause of Irish freedom. To his detractors, he is a criminal mastermind who exploited the conflict to build a personal empire of illicit wealth. His story, from alleged IRA commander to convicted tax evader, is a complex tapestry of politics, power, and criminal enterprise. As Ireland continues to grapple with its past, the legend of Slab Murphy serves as both a cautionary tale and a reflection on the blurred boundaries between war, politics, and crime. Freddie Scappaticci, an Irish member of the IRA, was identified in the Conway report as a British intelligence informant with the codename Steakknife. As part of the IRA internal security unit, Scappaticci played a significant role. In 2003, reports surfaced claiming that he had been working covertly for British intelligence as their highest-ranking agent within the IRA. However, both the IRA and Scappaticci publicly denied any collaboration with British intelligence. Born on January 12, 1946, in Belfast, Scappaticci was the son of Mary Murray and Danny Scappaticci, an Italian immigrant who arrived in the city in the 1920s. In 1970, Scappaticci was fined for riotous assembly during the early years of the Troubles. A year later, at 25, he was detained without trial at Long Kesh as part of Operation Demetrius. During his internment, he was held alongside future key Republican figures such as Ivor Bell, Gerry Adams, and Alex Maskey. Though he was a low-ranking member of the Provisional IRA at the time, he returned to work in construction after his release, where he later faced questioning from police regarding his involvement in a suspected tax fraud scheme. By 1980, Freddie Scappaticci had become a key figure in the IRA Northern Command's internal security unit, which was responsible for counterintelligence and investigating potential leaks within the organization. The ISU's main role was to identify and expose informers, known as touts, within the IRA. Scappaticci played a critical role in investigating compromised operations and suspected informants. The ISU, also referred to as the Nutting Squad, gained notoriety for executing informers by shooting them in the back of the head. Scappaticci was linked to 18 killings carried out by the ISU, including the murders of 2 senior police officers, and an alleged informer named Joe Fenton. When the allegations about his double role surfaced in 2003, Scappaticci, living in the Riverdale area of West Belfast at the time, claimed that he had left the IRA in 1990 to care for his ill wife. He denied any involvement with British intelligence and subsequently left Northern Ireland, entering witness protection. He reportedly lived in areas like Cheshire and Manchester, where his brother resided, and later moved to a gated community in London. There, he appeared in Westminster Court and was cleared of alleged sex offences. In 2017, Scappaticci briefly returned to Belfast for his 99-year-old father's funeral. His wife remained in Belfast, and from 2004 onwards they lived apart, though they reportedly stayed in contact and occasionally vacationed together until her passing in 2019. Around this period, Scappaticci was believed to be living in Guildford. Freddie Scappaticci's alleged involvement with British intelligence is said to have begun in 1978, 2 years before the establishment of the Force Research Unit in 1980, which centralized Army intelligence under the Intelligence Corps. He is believed to have initially worked as an informant for the RUC Special Branch after being questioned by the RUC Fraud Squad regarding a construction industry tax scam. Facing the prospect of prison, Scappaticci reportedly agreed to act as a low-level informer. A former FRU agent, writing under the pseudonym Martin Ingram, detailed in his 2004 book Steakknife that Scappaticci eventually rose to become Agent 6126, a highly valuable asset managed by British Army intelligence through the FRU. Ingram stated that Scappaticci's importance as an intelligence source became apparent in 1982 after he was arrested for drunk driving. According to Ingram, Scappaticci was viewed as the crown jewels, the most prized agent under FRU control, earning an annual salary of £80,000. Ingram levied several accusations against him, particularly focusing on individuals killed by the IRA Internal Security Unit between 1980 and 1990. He also claimed that Scappaticci provided key intelligence on IRA operations, including the 1981 kidnapping of Irish supermarket magnate Ben Dunn, with Scappaticci allegedly identifying the kidnappers to authorities. A 1983 plot to kidnap Canadian businessman Galen Weston, which was planned at Weston's estate near Dublin. The kidnapping of supermarket executive Don Tidy from his Dublin home, which Scappaticci reportedly alerted the FRU about. This led to a clash that resulted in the deaths of Garda trainee Gary Sheehan and Irish Army soldier Private Patrick Kelly. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Scappaticci is believed to have worked closely with FRU handlers to solidify his standing within the IRA. However, controversy surrounds claims made by Ingram that the FRU killed individuals who might have exposed Scappaticci as an informant. Steakknife is alleged to have served as an FRU informant for 25 years, acting as a double agent involved in the IRA's torture and execution of suspected informers while being employed by British intelligence. Operation Canova was later launched by the British government to investigate claims that the RUC had neglected to investigate up to 18 murders to keep Steakknife's identity concealed. In 1987, Sam McCrory, a member of the UDA, murdered 66-year-old Francisco Notarantonio at his home in Ballymurphy, West Belfast. Notarantonio, a Republican sympathiser, was unknowingly targeted by the FRU as part of a scheme to divert attention away from Freddie Scappaticci. It is alleged that FRU agent Brian Nelson provided Notarantonio's name to the UDA in order to protect Scappaticci's identity. On May 11, 2003, the Sunday Herald, a Glasgow-based newspaper, publicly identified Scappaticci as Steakknife, a British spy who had infiltrated the IRA at its highest levels for more than 2 decades. Scappaticci denied these allegations and unsuccessfully attempted to take legal action against the British government to force a public denial of his involvement as an agent. In February 2007, the Belfast newsletter reported on a cassette recording, allegedly of Scappaticci, detailing the number of murders he was involved in through the IRA's Nutting Squad and his activities as a British Army agent. The recording had been handed over to the Police Service of Northern Ireland in 2004 and later passed to the Stevens Inquiry in 2005. In 1993, Freddie Scappaticci approached the ITV programme The Cook Report and agreed to be interviewed about his involvement in the IRA and the alleged role of Martin McGuinness within the organisation. The first interview occurred on August 26, 1993, in the car park of the Culloden Hotel in Coultra, County Down. Unbeknownst to Scappaticci, the interview was secretly recorded and later featured in an edition of the show. When the 2003 allegations against Scappaticci surfaced, the interview was posted online. During the interview, Scappaticci provided detailed insights into the operations of the IRA's Northern Command, admitted to some of his activities within the organisation, and claimed that Martin McGuinness had been involved in the killing of Frank Hegarty. Hegarty, an IRA volunteer, was killed in 1986 for allegedly acting as an informer. It was later suggested that Scappaticci was familiar with the circumstances of Hegarty's execution because, as a member of the IRA's internal security unit, he had participated in Hegarty's interrogation and killing, which related to a Libyan arms cache discovered by the Garda. According to Martin Ingram, Hegarty was an FRU agent whom other members of the FRU had helped rise within the IRA to gain the trust of key figures. Scappaticci's situation worsened when Sir John Stevens, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, who was investigating collusion between British security forces and Loyalist paramilitaries, knew of his existence. Stevens was looking into the killings of Protestant student Brian Adam Lambert in 1987 and solicitor Pat Finucane in 1989. In April 2004, Stevens announced his intention to question Scappaticci as part of the third Stevens inquiry. A February 2007 report in the Belfast newsletter detailed a cassette recording, allegedly of Freddie Scappaticci, discussing his involvement in multiple murders through the IRA's Nutting Squad and his role as a British Army agent. The recording, submitted to the PSNI in 2004, was passed to the Stevens Inquiry in 2005. It remains unclear whether this audio was connected to the Cook Report investigation. Various media reports about Scappaticci being Steakknife contained inconsistencies. The Provisional IRA, however, reportedly accepted Scappaticci's denials and publicly suggested that claims he was a tout were a British government tactic to discredit Sinn Féin and the broader Republican movement. In January 2018, Scappaticci was arrested in connection with offences such as murder and abduction, but was later released on bail. On December 5, 2018, Westminster Magistrates Court sentenced him to 3 months in prison, suspended for 1 year, after he pleaded guilty to possessing extreme pornographic images, including those involving animals. The discovery of this material occurred during an investigation into serious crimes from the Troubles. In August 2024, Ian Livingstone, former head of Operation Canova, revealed that MI5 had not disclosed all information it possessed regarding Steakknife before the operation published its report earlier that year. Livingstone, along with John Boucher, the former head of Canova, had previously believed they had full access to MI5 files on Steakknife. In a letter to key officials, including Secretary of State for Northern Ireland Hilary Benn and the head of MI5, Livingstone expressed concerns about the hundreds of pages of undisclosed documents still under review, which could lead to new evidence or challenge findings from Operation Canova. The files, according to Livingstone, were specifically related to Steakknife, not other Canova investigations such as Denton. Sinn Féin MP John Finucane called it disgraceful and unsurprising that British intelligence had withheld information from the inquiry. He criticised the British government's Shameful Legacy Act for limiting families' access to courts and expressed frustration over the delay in the Canova report's publication, which had been set for release before Christmas 2024. This delay, Finucane said, would deepen the anguish of victims' families who had long awaited the truth. He urged investigators to handle the new material thoroughly and swiftly. As a result, the final Canova report, initially scheduled for publication in late 2024, has been postponed until 2025 to allow time for reviewing the newly disclosed information. On April 11, 2023, it was announced that Freddie Scappaticci had passed away the previous week at the age of 77. Sir John Wilsey, a general who commanded the British Army in Northern Ireland from 1983 to 1990, described Steakknife as the most valuable agent within military intelligence during the Troubles, referring to him as the Golden Egg. According to Wilsey, Steakknife was instrumental in saving hundreds and hundreds of lives. Scappaticci was also suspected of alerting British security forces about the 1988 IRA operation in Gibraltar, during which 3 IRA members were killed.
During the highly anticipated Manchester Derby on October 2, 2022, Sean Fox, accompanied by his uncle and 2 children, watched the game at the Donegal Celtic FC Social Club in West Belfast. As the atmosphere buzzed with excitement for the clash between Manchester United and Manchester City, led by Eric Ten Hag, tension mounted. Unbeknownst to most, except Sean and his family, the event took a horrifying turn at 2:30 p.m. when 2 unidentified men, suspected to have ties to dissident groups, stormed the club and fatally shot Sean with 20 bullets, leaving witnesses shocked and emergency services unable to save him. The police, diligently investigating the incident, pursue various leads and strongly believe that several factions of dissident Republicans are responsible for Sean's tragic murder. Despite no official claims of responsibility, prior warnings from law enforcement about threats to Sean's life, linked to allegations of involvement with the Marbella crew, raised suspicions. Sean vehemently denied any association with drug dealing on Facebook in 2021, addressing rumors about his wealth and condemning those spreading falsehoods. While debate lingers over Sean's alleged ties to the Marbella crew, police assert this affiliation as the motive behind his targeted attack, citing similarities to other drug-related murders. Law enforcement maintains the involvement of the same groups in all 6 incidents, suggesting a coordinated effort. Sean Fox, according to law enforcement, was taken out by the dissident death squad. Who were the other 5? Let's delve into it. If we go back to December 4, 2018, specifically around 3:30 p.m., we encounter the first incident linked to the series. Jim Donegan, purported to be a cocaine distributor and a close associate of Sean Fox, was waiting in his 80,000 pounds Porsche outside St. Mary's Grammar School on Glen Road, West Belfast, to pick up his son. Leading up to this day, reports suggest that Jim had resisted pressure to increase his payments to local dissident groups operating in the area, which ultimately led to his targeted assassination. While several individuals have been apprehended in connection to Jim Donegan's murder, the actual shooter has yet to face formal charges from law enforcement. On the night of May 17, 2020, shortly after 10 p.m., Kieran Wiley, a 57-year-old former Provisional IRA member, was mercilessly gunned down at his Lenadoon residence in West Belfast. In front of his two daughters, two hooded attackers swiftly executed the assault, leaving a lifetime of trauma in their wake. Despite prompt emergency response, Kieran tragically succumbed to his injuries, having been shot in the torso and fatally in the head. 4 years earlier, Kieran's affiliation with the organization had waned after an arms cache discovery, leading to his sidelining, while an unrelated individual faced legal consequences for possession of the stash. As investigators followed the money trail linked to Kieran, he disclosed to detectives that he had been coerced at gunpoint into temporarily storing weapons, under the promise they would be retrieved within 6 weeks. Despite no concrete evidence of Kieran being a police informant, suspicions arose within his organization, exacerbated by a court case involving a senior figure, Robert O'Neill. O'Neill's sentencing, coupled with MI5 recordings implicating him in criminal activities, led to Kieran's official ties to the organization being documented. Consequently, an internal inquiry within the dissident group identified Kieran as a police informant, sealing his fate. In the months leading up to his tragic murder, Kieran faced public accusations of being an informant, which he vehemently denied. Despite his efforts to defend himself, even engaging in direct confrontations with his organization to plead his innocence, his appeals were futile. As you know, he was ruthlessly murdered in front of his daughters. Police suspect that the perpetrators of Kieran's murder are the same individuals involved in the killings of both Sean and Jim. On June 27, 2020, at approximately 12:20 p.m., CCTV footage captured 28-year-old Warren Crossan being pursued by two gunmen near his mother's residence in Rodney Parade, West Belfast. These gunmen were seen riding bicycles around 8:30 a.m. at the junction of Falls Road and White Rock Road, not far from the murder scene, believed to have departed from the Turf Lodge estate about 40 minutes earlier in preparation for the attack. Upon Warren's emergence, the gunmen initiated pursuit, and as they reached St. Catherine's Road, he sustained multiple gunshot wounds, tragically perishing at the scene, believed to be retribution for his alleged involvement in orchestrating the assassination of Dublin crime boss Robbie Lawler in Belfast 2 months prior. Lawler's notoriety had garnered global attention in 2020 due to his association with the disappearance and murder of 17-year-old Keane Mulready Woods. As a result, Robbie had already been implicated in numerous homicides due to ongoing conflicts between his organization and rival factions. The discovery of Keane's dismembered remains across Ireland reverberated shockwaves throughout the nation. Robbie and Warren were loosely linked through mutual associates within the criminal underworld. An incident dating back to 2014 may have served as the impetus for Warren's involvement in the plot against Robbie. On Friday, April 18, 2014, at approximately 4:45 p.m., Warren's father, Tommy Crossan, leader of the Continuity IRA, was fatally shot near the Peter Pan Light Industrial Complex on Springfield Road in Belfast. Despite investigations, no one was ever convicted for his murder, but sources suggest that the assailants had ties to Robbie. Returning to the murder of Warren, the case remains unresolved. According to police, the individuals responsible for his killing are the same perpetrators behind the murders of Jim, Kieran, and Sean. Nearly a year after Warren's tragic demise, with 3 confirmed victims attributed to the assailants, the time was ripe for their next deadly strike. Around 8 p.m. on February 2, 2021, Daniel McLean was seated in the driver's seat of a red Audi Q2 parked in the driveway of a property on Cliftonville Road, North Belfast, when an assailant suddenly approached and shot him multiple times. Daniel was pronounced dead. British Army before affiliating with a Republican group, Daniel had recently distanced himself from this organization amid allegations of being an informant. While the specific motive behind his murder remains uncertain, it's worth noting that he was killed while out on bail for firearms charges, suggesting a potential reason for him being a primary target. However, these are all allegations at this point. As of October 2022, Daniel's murder case remains unsolved, but police assert that the same individuals responsible for the murders of Jim, Kieran, Warren, and Sean are also implicated in Daniel's killing. Mark Hall, age 31, had been considering leaving his criminal life after the death of his friend Warren Crossan. Despite his intentions to turn over a new leaf following the birth of his daughter, his criminal connections continued to haunt him. Tragically, his hopes for a fresh start were shattered when two gunmen attacked his mother's residence near the site of his friend's murder, disrupting his Christmas holiday. Striking Mark multiple times and tragically ending his life. Family members, including children, were present during the attack, but thankfully they escaped physical harm. Mark's sister, returning from a nearby shop, witnessed the shooting and attempted to intervene. In a terrifying turn of events, one of the gunmen targeted her, pointing his weapon at her head before firing shots at her handbag and then fleeing the scene. Initially, speculations arose suggesting that Mark had been targeted due to his criminal background. However, following the public revelation of his threats toward Warren's killers, it became evident that the attack served as a stark message to anyone contemplating similar actions. It's been reported that Mark had been warned by the police about the possibility of an attack targeting him, although his reaction to this information remains unclear. Despite this warning, he likely disregarded it, as he continued to remain in the area where he could easily be located. As with every case we've discussed today, Mark's murder remains unsolved. However, law enforcement authorities maintain a strong belief that the individuals responsible for his killing are the same perpetrators behind the murders of Sean, Jim, Kieran, Warren, and Daniel. So, where does this leave us today? Currently, the police are actively pursuing the hitmen responsible for the 6 murders. Despite the authorities beginning to link the killings after Mark Hall's murder, it's evident that the hitmen are undeterred, as demonstrated by their audacious attack on Sean Fox in a crowded social club, where hundreds of witnesses were present. This brazenness indicates that they will strike again, even when the target is surrounded by potential witnesses. What we do know is that these hitmen are associated with either one or two dissident Republican groups. Despite arrests, no one has yet been formally charged in connection with these crimes. Concerns have been raised by associates of the victims, suggesting that individuals close to them may be providing information to the hitmen regarding their whereabouts. The nature of these meticulously planned executions lends credence to such suspicions. However, until these men are apprehended and brought to justice, it seems unlikely that their deadly operations will come to an end anytime soon.
In the annals of Irish history, few names evoke as much controversy and notoriety as Dessie O'Hare, infamously known as the Border Fox. Born on October 26, 1956, in Keady, County Armagh, O'Hare's life story is a complex tapestry woven with threads of political violence, criminal activities, and attempts at redemption. His journey from a young paramilitary recruit to one of Ireland's most wanted men, and later, a convicted criminal seeking rehabilitation, mirrors the tumultuous history of Northern Ireland itself. O'Hare's upbringing was deeply rooted in Irish republicanism. His family had a long history of involvement in the cause, with his grandmother having served time in a British prison for her Republican associations, and his father and uncles experiencing internment during the 1940s. Growing up in this environment of resistance and perceived oppression, it's perhaps unsurprising that O'Hare was drawn to paramilitary activities from a young age. The political and social climate of Northern Ireland in the 1960s and early 1970s was one of increasing tension and violence. The civil rights movement, which sought to address discrimination against the Catholic minority, was met with fierce opposition from Loyalist groups and elements within the security forces. This period, known as the Troubles, saw the resurgence of paramilitary organizations on both sides of the conflict. At the tender age of 16, O'Hare joined the Provisional IRA, a decision that would set the course for much of his adult life. The Provisional IRA, formed in 1969, was committed to using armed struggle to achieve a united Ireland, free from British rule. For young men like O'Hare, joining the IRA was seen as a way to fight against perceived injustice and oppression. However, O'Hare's time with the Provisional IRA was relatively short-lived. He later aligned himself with the INLA, a more radical splinter group known for its extreme tactics and Marxist ideology. Joining the INLA, formed in 1974, quickly gained a reputation for its willingness to engage in acts of violence that even the IRA considered beyond the pale. It was during his time with INLA that O'Hare began to build his reputation as a skilled evader of justice, earning him the nickname the Border Fox. This moniker referred to his ability to move freely across the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, exploiting the jurisdictional difficulties faced by law enforcement on both sides. As O'Hare became more deeply involved in paramilitary activities, a darker side of his personality emerged. His participation in internal INLA feuds and boastful claims of killing 26 people revealed the depths of his violent nature. One particularly disturbing incident highlighted his volatile character. He reportedly shot at his own wife during an argument over another man. O'Hare's first significant brush with the law came at age 19 when he was found guilty of possessing explosives. He received a suspended sentence, a relatively light punishment that failed to deter him from further criminal activities. This early encounter with the justice system would be the first of many, setting the stage for a life marked by violence and repeated incarcerations. In 1979, O'Hare and his unit were involved in one of the most shocking acts of his career, the killing of Margaret Hurst, a 24-year-old single mother and British Army member. The brutality of this act was compounded by the fact that Hurst was shot dead in front of her 3-year-old daughter, mother, and grandmother. This incident highlighted the ruthlessness of O'Hare and his associates and the devastating impact of their actions on innocent families. 2 years later, O'Hare was accused of attempting to murder a groom at his wedding. The target, Lieutenant Gary Cass, another British Army member, had just exited St. Patrick's Church in County Meath after his wedding ceremony, when O'Hare and an accomplice allegedly shot him twice.
Mr. Cass, a member of the British Army, had just married a local girl, Miss Jacqueline Johnson. They left the church and were posing for photographs when 3 men pulled up in a car. One of the eyewitnesses to what happened next was a local disc jockey, Neil Lacey. What happened?
Well, I was just arrived on my bike and I was just watching the wedding when a car stopped and 3 men jumped from the car, and one of them fired a light machine gun, some shots from a light machine gun into the air, which dispersed the crowd, and 2 more of them walked over into the lawn of the church and fired some shots at the groom and bride, and then they ran off, and that was it as far as I was concerned.
Lieutenant Cass was rushed to hospital seriously wounded, but is now thought to be out of danger. After the shooting, shocked guests refused to talk to press. Indeed, some of them furiously attacked journalists and had to be restrained by Gardaí. Some of those guests complained of a lack of security. The gunman's car, a red Cortina, was found burnt out near Navan, and Gardaí are still protecting other members of the wedding party tonight. Lieutenant Cass is a member of the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, and it's thought he comes from the Isle of Wight. One other guest was slightly injured. Some were treated for shock. The Taoiseach, Mr. Lynch, said tonight that it was hard to believe that any group, no matter how base, could shoot down a man in cold blood in such a manner. He said the crime was all the more reprehensible that it was done at the end of a marriage ceremony. He wished the victims a speedy recovery and extended his sympathy to the young bride and both families.
In a twist of fate, O'Hare was acquitted after a trial based solely on visual identification evidence, highlighting the difficulties in prosecuting paramilitary crimes during this period. O'Hare's life of violence didn't come without personal cost. Just weeks after his acquittal in the Cass case, he was shot twice during a South Armor IRA raid. One of O'Hare's companions was killed in the incident, and another was injured. This event underscored the dangerous nature of O'Hare's chosen path and the constant threat of violence that surrounded him. In October 1979, O'Hare was again involved in a violent incident that would lead to his first lengthy imprisonment. He and 2 other IRA men were stopped by armed guards while driving a car containing a gun and ammunition. A dramatic chase ensued, ending when O'Hare crashed his vehicle through a herd of cattle and into a farmer's car before coming to rest in a field. O'Hare broke both ankles in the crash, and one of his passengers died. This incident resulted in a 9-year prison sentence for O'Hare, of which he served 6 years. During this incarceration, O'Hare's personal life took an unexpected turn. He became engaged to Claire Doyle shortly before being imprisoned, and they married in Portlaoise prison the following year. Their daughter was born soon after, adding a new dimension to O'Hare's life, even as he remained behind bars. This period of imprisonment and the formation of his own family could have been a turning point for O'Hare, an opportunity to reassess his life choices and consider a different path. However, upon his release in 1986, he quickly returned to his old ways. Upon regaining his freedom, O'Hare wasted no time in rejoining the INLA in Dundalk. He quickly became embroiled in a bloody feud between factions in Dundalk and Belfast, a period that saw a series of brutal killings. One of the most notorious incidents during this time was the murder of Mary McGlinchey, the wife of INLA man Dominic McGlinchey. O'Hare effectively took control of the Dundalk INLA, which at the time consisted of approximately a dozen active terrorists. It was during this period that O'Hare committed one of the most horrific acts attributed to him, the torture and killing of Tony McCloskey, a rival associate. McCloskey was kidnapped, subjected to severe torture, including having his ear and finger severed with a bolt cutter before being shot and his body dumped in a rural area. In a later interview, O'Hare admitted to this gruesome act, showcasing a disturbing lack of remorse that would become characteristic of his public persona. O'Hare seemed to revel in his notorious status, carrying out murders and bank robberies while continually evading justice. Fueled by media attention, he even began referring to himself as the Border Fox when giving statements to authorities, demonstrating a level of bravado that would become his trademark. However, it was the infamous kidnapping of dentist Dr. John O'Grady in 1987 that would cement O'Hare's place in Irish criminal history and ultimately lead to his downfall. O'Hare led an INLA operation to kidnap Dr. O'Grady from his home in Dublin, demanding a ransom of £1.5 million. What followed was a 23-day ordeal that captivated and horrified the entire country.
What do you mean there's nothing on the statue? Did you look on the Our Lady statue at the 13th station of the cross in Limerick City in the cathedral? How many fucking cathedrals is there? I just sent word to my man to chop off 2 of his fingers. So I don't know what fingers they're going to chop off. So I'm going to pick up his fingers now. Yeah? So give me your home number so I can tell you where to get them. There was super glue on. It's probably stuck underneath the actual statue. Now the statue was on top of a table. Well, it's just cost it's just cost John 2 of his fingers. Now, and I'm going to chop them up in bits and pieces and send fresh lumps of them every fucking day if I don't get my money fast. Now, I'll ring you later and tell you where to pick these fingers up, the photographs and the note.
During this horrific episode, Dr. O'Grady was subjected to severe physical and psychological torture. In one particularly brutal act, O'Hare used a hammer and chisel to cut off 2 of O'Grady's fingers. This act of mutilation demonstrated O'Hare's capacity for extreme violence and served as a gruesome message to authorities about the seriousness of the kidnappers' intentions. The kidnapping ended when Dr. O'Grady was finally released from the house where he was being detained in Cabra, Dublin. While O'Hare initially managed to escape, he was later tracked down and shot by an army sniper. During the 23 days of the kidnapping, O'Hare and his INLA men had engaged in several gun battles with the guards, further highlighting the danger they posed to public safety. The following year, O'Hare was sentenced to 2 consecutive 20-year terms of imprisonment, one of the longest fixed-term prison sentences ever handed down in the Republic of Ireland for a non-capital murder offence. By this point, O'Hare had solidified his position as one of Ireland's most notorious gunmen. O'Hare remained in prison until 2006, when he was released under the terms of the Belfast Agreement, also known as the Good Friday Agreement. This historic peace accord, signed in 1998, aimed to bring an end to the decades-long conflict in Northern Ireland. As part of the agreement, many paramilitary prisoners, including O'Hare, were granted early release. Interestingly, O'Hare was the last of the state's inmates to qualify for early release under this historic peace accord. His release marked the end of an era, symbolizing the complex process of transitioning from conflict to peace in Northern Ireland. Following his release, O'Hare maintained a relatively low profile for several years. He settled in Newtown, Hamilton, engaging in farming and working with people with disabilities. He even ran a craft business using skills learned in prison. This period suggested that O'Hare might have turned away from his violent past, embracing a quieter, more peaceful existence. However, according to Guards intelligence, O'Hare hadn't entirely severed his ties with the criminal underworld. He was believed to have remained active in extortion, gaining a reputation as an enforcer in the business world. The authorities also suspected that he maintained contact with active dissident Republicans, including those associated with the new IRA, a group that rejected the peace process and continued to pursue armed struggle. O'Hare's attempt at a quieter life ended abruptly in 2015, when he became involved in the violent abduction and assault of Martin Byrne, a former security guard for the Mansfield family. Byrne was kidnapped by a 7-man gang, including O'Hare, after a meeting with businessman Jim Mansfield Jr. Byrne was taken to his house in Saggart and savagely beaten in front of his terrified wife. This violent act led to O'Hare's return to the courtroom in April 2019. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, with 3 years suspended, for his role in the violent eviction of Byrne and his family. This incident demonstrated that despite his claims of rehabilitation, O'Hare was still capable of resorting to extreme violence. During his most recent imprisonment, O'Hare reportedly underwent a profound transformation. He developed interests in anthropology, psychology, metaphysics, and yoga, claiming to have discovered a divine force within himself. This spiritual awakening, if genuine, represents yet another surprising turn in the life of this complex and controversial figure. On June 27, 2024, at the age of 68, O'Hare was released from Portlaoise prison after serving the maximum time allowable for the false imprisonment and assault of Martin Byrne. His release once again brings his controversial legacy to the forefront of public discourse in Ireland. The story of Dessie O'Hare, the Border Fox, encapsulates many of the complex issues that have shaped modern Irish history. His life journey from a young IRA recruit to a notorious INLA leader, and then to a convicted criminal trying to reinvent himself, raises important questions about rehabilitation, justice, and the long-term impacts of political violence. As O'Hare steps back into freedom, many in Ireland will be watching closely. Will he be able to stay out of prison and leave his criminal past behind? Or will he once again find himself drawn back into illegal activities?
Police in Northern Ireland have named the man shot dead in Belfast last night. It's understood 26-year-old Kevin Conway was on bail, awaiting trial on charges linked to a separate gangland killing.
Mr Conway had been on bail on charges linked to the murder of another man in County Armagh last year. Prosecutors had claimed that he'd helped to lure the victim to the area by making phone calls to him. That murder was linked to a notorious Mid-Ulster crime gang known as the Firm.
On the evening of January 9th, 2023, Kevin Conway, a well-known figure in the Lurgan underworld, was at home in Rossnareen Park, located in the Greenan area of West Belfast. Despite facing trial for the murder of Shane Whitla, a father of 4, Conway had been granted bail to stay at this particular address. During a quiet moment after a brief errand, tragedy struck around 9 p.m. A gunman approached Conway's flat calmly. Upon opening the door, Conway found himself under attack as a hail of bullets struck him, with at least 9 hitting his head and chest. The killer, moving swiftly on foot, vanished into the night, leaving Conway to perish on his own doorstep. Let's delve into it. At just 26 years old, Kevin Conway had already made a name for himself, albeit a notorious one with the police. He was a prominent figure in the crime scene of Lurgan and Portadown, affiliated with the gang known as the Firm. Conway's involvement in the world of crime started during his teenage years, and he steadily rose through the ranks. However, recent events had left Conway increasingly paranoid. He voiced concerns to the police about being stalked by a rival gang, fearing for his life. Sadly, his fears were justified. Hailing from the Kilwilkie estate, Conway's life was marred by tragedy from an early age. His father, Kevin Conway Sr., met a mysterious fate in 1998 while looking after his 3-month-old son. He disappeared from their home, only to be found days later in a remote farmhouse, bound and fatally shot in the head. Though the IRA never officially claimed responsibility, suspicions lingered, pointing to his potential involvement in drug-related activities, a taboo in Kilwilkie at the time. The loss of his father had a profound impact on Kevin Conway's life, setting the stage for a turbulent journey ahead. Abandoned at a mere 3 months old, Conway's life took a dark turn toward criminality. He started with minor offenses before affiliating himself with the Firm. Conway's descent into drug abuse began in primary school, shattering the promise of his early life. Now facing murder charges, Conway had become a feared enforcer for the Firm, ruthlessly collecting drug debts with an iron fist. This organization, which had been in existence for about a decade, had evolved from the Loyalist Volunteer Force, LVF, initially a paramilitary group led by Billy Wright. Over time, it transformed into an organized crime gang under the leadership of the King brothers, Billy and Drew. Primarily operating in large-scale drug and prostitution ventures in the Portadown area, the Firm humorously adopted its name from the poorly received football movie released in 2009. Unlike anything authorities had seen before, the Firm boasted a network of young runners and a significant presence of young women within its ranks. Many of these runners struggled with addiction, compelled to sell drugs to sustain their habits. Paradoxically, their involvement often led to substantial indebtedness to the Firm. The consequences of defying this criminal organization were starkly illustrated by the murder of Shane Whitla. In contrast to well-known drug cartels like the Kinahans, synonymous with cocaine, the Firm operated in the darker realm of the drug trade. Beyond cocaine, their portfolio included heroin and illicit prescription medications such as tramadol and diazepam, known as blues and yellows. These inexpensive medications, procured in bulk from Asia, fueled a growing addiction crisis in Northern Ireland, paralleled by rising suicide rates, echoing distressing trends observed in vulnerable segments of society. These tactics mirrored those employed by the notorious Irish gang, the Family. Similar to its counterparts, the Firm preyed on the most vulnerable segments of society. Kevin Conway met a brutal end in his own home in West Belfast, where he was compelled to reside on bail, separated from his family and support system. He was one of 3 individuals charged with the murder of Shane Whitlaw, who was shot in Lurgan in January 2023. According to the police, Whitlaw was targeted due to a significant drug debt owed to the firm. Following Whitlaw's murder, fear gripped the community of Lurgan as the firm sought to settle all outstanding drug debts. Conway was accused of playing a crucial role in luring Whitlaw to a specific location where he was subsequently executed. Linked to Whitlaw's murder by the Police Service of Northern Ireland, PSNI, a year prior, Conway adamantly maintained his innocence, expressing fear for his life. He insisted that the police had unfairly targeted him, citing a lack of substantial evidence beyond a single phone call. Initially granted bail in February 2023, Conway's subsequent breach led to his voluntary surrender 2 days later in July of the same year. Despite objections from law enforcement, he was granted bail once more, under the condition that he could not reside in Lurgan or Portadown. A residence in West Belfast was agreed upon, a decision that tragically led to his demise. Despite Conway's belief that he could keep a low profile in West Belfast, his reputation as a notorious gangster inevitably drew attention and raised concerns within the tight-knit community. Until Conway's murder, the firm had operated without facing significant challenges in the Mid-Ulster area, using extreme measures like pipe bombings to instill fear. Conway's death marked the first time they encountered resistance. The question arises, was this a retaliation for the Whitlaw murder, as Conway feared, or was there a different motive at play? The Police Service of Northern Ireland, PSNI, is exploring various leads, including the possibility that Conway's own gang orchestrated his murder to prevent him from informing. However, sources from Lurgan and Portadown suggest that members of the firm are now living in fear, casting doubt on the theory of their involvement. Conway's close ties with the firm and the tributes posted on Facebook by its members suggest they might not be responsible. The prevailing belief now is that the motive may originate from within West Belfast itself. There is strong suspicion that the same individuals responsible for several murders in the area targeted Kevin Conway to send a clear message. West Belfast will not tolerate drug operations or gang members. This act serves as a consequence for bringing such activities into the community. A 37-year-old man was briefly apprehended a week following Conway's murder, but was released on bail the following day. Crime Stoppers has announced a £20,000 reward for any information leading to the arrest and conviction of those responsible. The circumstances surrounding Conway's brutal killing strongly suggest the involvement of the same hitman responsible for 6 other murders in West Belfast, including Sean Fox, Jim Donegan, and Warren Crossan. In each case, the killers disappeared without a trace, and no getaway vehicle was utilized. Given the intricate layout of West Belfast, it appears unlikely that an outsider from Lurgan or Portadown executed the hit and escaped successfully. The fact that the gunman fled on foot indicates not only local knowledge but also local support, as they likely had access to a nearby residence for changing clothes and disposing of weapons. The prevailing belief is that Conway was not targeted by rival factions of the firm, but was instead killed by a local Republican hit squad or hitman. The underlying message is clear. While acting tough in Lurgan or Portadown may be tolerated in the name of the firm, stepping into Republican-controlled West Belfast presents a different scenario, the playground of the big boys. This raises questions about how Conway could have considered the bail address in West Belfast a safe choice. It seems that a vigilant figure, reminiscent of an enforcer, is targeting drug dealers like Conway, a tactic reminiscent of past occurrences. Years ago, following the Good Friday Agreement, a group known as Direct Action Against Drugs, a front for the Provisional IRA, employed a similar strategy. They systematically eliminated key players in the drug trade. In the wake of Whitlaw's murder, dissidents have vowed to confront the firm. Affiliated thugs with the INLA in County Armagh have even compiled a list of Portadown drug dealers, marking them as targets. The underlying motivation behind these actions appears to be a warning. Do not assume you can relocate here and remain safe. Transmitting the message from Lurgan to West Belfast is deemed unacceptable. Conway's killing has prompted graffiti supporting Direct Action Against Drugs to surface in Lurgan, accompanied by threats against other members of the firm. This serves as a clear lesson for any drug dealers. Avoid establishing roots in West Belfast.
Alan Ryan's story begins in the turbulent environment of North Dublin, where he emerged as a prominent figure in the real IRA. From a young age, Ryan demonstrated a fierce commitment to the Republican cause, joining the youth wing of the IRA before he even reached adulthood. His involvement in the armed Republican movement was a natural progression for someone so deeply immersed in the political and ideological currents of his community. As a teenager, Ryan's commitment to the cause was evident. Despite the ongoing peace process and the changing dynamics of the IRA, Ryan remained staunchly loyal to the principles of armed struggle. His early encounters with the law, including his arrest at an IRA training camp, only solidified his reputation within the dissident Republican movement. His time in Portlaoise prison, among the political prisoners, further entrenched his resolve and his stature within the movement. Upon his release, Ryan's leadership within the Real IRA Dublin Brigade became more pronounced. He sought to assert the group's relevance in a city where criminal enterprises and drug gangs were beginning to overshadow traditional political struggles. His efforts to revive the Real IRA influence led to an increase in violent confrontations with rival gangs, marking the beginning of a new era of conflict in Dublin's underworld. The early 2010s were marked by escalating tensions in Dublin's criminal underworld. As the Real IRA, under Alan Ryan's leadership, sought to reassert its influence, it found itself in conflict with established criminal organizations, notably the Kinahan cartel. This period saw a series of violent incidents that underscored the intensifying struggle for control over Dublin's lucrative drug trade. The Kinahan cartel, already entrenched in the city's criminal landscape, viewed the Real IRA as a significant threat to their dominance. The rivalry between the two groups was marked by a series of violent clashes, with each side seeking to outmaneuver the other. The Real IRA attempt to reassert itself through violent means only served to further exacerbate the tensions, leading to a cycle of retaliation and escalating violence. During this time, the Real IRA actions included a mix of political posturing and criminal activities. Their efforts to position themselves as defenders of traditional Republican values were increasingly overshadowed by their involvement in extortion, drug trafficking, and violent enforcement against rivals. The contrast between their purported political motives and their criminal activities became increasingly stark, contributing to the growing instability in Dublin. Alan Ryan's death on September 3, 2012, was a turning point in the ongoing conflict. The murder, which occurred in the midst of a chaotic period for the Real IRA, shocked the city and marked a significant escalation in the violence. Ryan was shot dead in broad daylight, a brazen act that highlighted the shifting dynamics within Dublin's criminal underworld. The aftermath of Ryan's murder was characterized by a period of intense turmoil and retribution. His death left a power vacuum within the Real IRA, leading to a period of internal strife and external pressures. The group struggled to maintain cohesion and leadership in the wake of Ryan's assassination, with various factions vying for control. Ryan's death also had a profound impact on the city's criminal landscape. The power vacuum created by his assassination led to increased violence and instability, as rival gangs and criminal organizations sought to capitalize on the disruption. The Real IRA, once a formidable force, found itself grappling with the consequences of Ryan's death and the subsequent rise of other criminal players. In the wake of Alan Ryan's murder, Dublin experienced a surge in violence as various factions within the criminal underworld sought to assert their dominance. The Real IRA, struggling to recover from the loss of their leader, faced increasing challenges from rival gangs and criminal organizations. The vacuum left by Ryan's death created an environment ripe for further conflict and power struggles. The Kinahan cartel, in particular, capitalized on the chaos. Their strategic maneuvers during this period involved consolidating their position in the drug trade and expanding their influence. The cartel's ability to adapt to the shifting dynamics allowed them to strengthen their grip on Dublin's criminal landscape. Their actions during this time included forging new alliances, expanding their operations, and eliminating potential threats. Meanwhile, the Real IRA internal struggles were exacerbated by the murder of Peter Butterley, a figure whose death further destabilized the organization. Butterley's murder was a significant blow to the real IRA and highlighted the group's vulnerability. The combination of internal turmoil and external pressures led to a period of disarray and decline for the real IRA Dublin Brigade. The murder of Vinnie Ryan on February 29, 2016, was a brutal chapter in Dublin's ongoing saga of gangland violence. Ryan, a prominent figure within the real IRA, was shot dead outside his home in Finglas. The attack, carried out in broad daylight, was a calculated move that underscored the volatility and danger of Dublin's criminal underworld. The murder was a significant event that highlighted the ongoing feud between the real IRA and other criminal factions. The shooting, which resulted in Ryan being struck by multiple bullets, was a stark reminder of the intensity of the conflict. The circumstances of the murder, Ryan's presence with his young daughter at the time, added a tragic dimension to the event. Speculation surrounding the perpetrators of Ryan's murder included suggestions of involvement by the Kin-Ahan cartel. While some believed that the cartel was directly responsible, others thought it was the work of independent operators or freelance hit teams. The ambiguity surrounding the motives and perpetrators added to the complexity of the situation and kept both law enforcement and the public guessing. As Dublin's underworld reeled from the violent clashes between the real IRA and rival gangs, the Kin-Ahan cartel emerged as a central player in the evolving power struggle. With Alan Ryan's death leaving a power vacuum, the Kin-Ahans, already well established in the city's drug trade, saw an opportunity to consolidate their influence and assert dominance over their rivals. The Kin-Ahan cartel's strategy was multifaceted. Recognizing the disruption caused by the feud, they intensified their criminal operations while maintaining a relatively low profile. Their approach was both strategic and opportunistic, capitalizing on the chaos to strengthen their position in the drug market. This included expanding their network, forging new alliances, and eliminating potential threats. The cartel's ability to adapt quickly to the shifting dynamics of gangland violence was a testament to their operational sophistication and ruthless efficiency. During this period, Dublin witnessed an increase in violence as various factions, including the Kin-Ahan cartel, engaged in turf wars and retaliatory attacks. The Kin-Ahans, known for their strategic acumen, carefully orchestrated their moves to avoid direct confrontations that could draw unwanted attention from law enforcement. Instead, they preferred to use intermediaries and subcontract criminals to carry out violent acts, thereby distancing themselves from the direct fallout of their actions. Despite the chaos, the Kin-Ahan cartel's influence continued to grow. Their ability to leverage the instability created by the feud allowed them to further entrench themselves in Dublin's criminal landscape. They capitalized on the disruption to expand their operations and strengthen their grip on the city's drug trade, making them a dominant force in the ongoing struggle for power. The downfall of the real IRA Dublin Brigade was both dramatic and decisive. The violence and instability following Alan Ryan's death led to a significant decline in the brigade's operational capacity. The organization's inability to maintain cohesion and discipline during the aftermath of Ryan's assassination was a critical factor in its downfall. Following Ryan's murder, the real IRA faced internal turmoil and external pressure. The group's leadership was in disarray, and its ranks were increasingly filled with individuals either arrested or disillusioned by the escalating violence and lack of progress. The disorganization was exacerbated by the murder of Peter Butterley, a figure whose death further destabilized the already fragile structure of the Dublin Brigade. The Guards took advantage of this instability. They launched a series of high-profile operations aimed at dismantling the real IRA remaining networks. These operations, fueled by intelligence gathered from ongoing investigations and the public's increased willingness to cooperate with law enforcement, resulted in numerous arrests and convictions. The trials that followed brought to light the extent of the real IRA involvement in criminal activities beyond their purported political aims. The convictions of individuals involved in the murder of Vinnie Ryan and other criminal acts underscored the group's transformation from a politically motivated organization into a criminal enterprise. The trials revealed the real IRA deep involvement in organized crime, including extortion, drug trafficking, and violent enforcement against rivals. The conviction of key figures in the organization marked a turning point. The Dublin Brigade, once a formidable force in the city's criminal and political landscape, was effectively dismantled. The group's ability to operate and exert influence was significantly diminished, leading to the collapse of its organized structure and a reduction in its activities. The fall of the Dublin Brigade had far-reaching implications. It not only weakened the real IRA presence in Dublin, but also shifted the balance of power in the city's criminal underworld. With the brigade's decline, other criminal organizations, including the Kinahan cartel, seized the opportunity to expand their influence and fill the void left by the real IRA disintegration. As the real IRA's Dublin Brigade faded into the background, the focus shifted to the new dynamics emerging in Dublin's criminal landscape. The power struggles and shifting alliances that followed the brigade's fall continued to shape the city's underworld, setting the stage for the next chapter in Dublin's ongoing saga of crime and violence. Eamonn Kelly, born in 1947 in the Summerhill district of Dublin, would go on to become one of Ireland's most infamous figures in the world of organised crime. From a humble background in a working-class neighbourhood, Kelly's journey into the criminal underworld would take him from petty crimes to masterminding large-scale drug smuggling operations. He became a key player in Dublin's criminal world, leading many to view him as the godfather of the city's underworld, a title that only grew as his criminal empire expanded. Growing up in the rough streets of Summerhill, Dublin, Eamonn Kelly's early life was marked by poverty and hardship. His father worked as a dock worker, while his mother was a homemaker, trying to make ends meet in a district often associated with crime and economic instability. From an early age, Kelly found himself exposed to the harsh realities of life, and it wasn't long before he became involved in petty crime. As a teenager, Kelly became known for small-time thefts and street-level crimes. He wasn't drawn into crime by any sense of ambition or grand design, but rather by necessity, as the lure of easy money and survival in an unforgiving environment made criminality an attractive option. Dublin's underbelly became his school, and from the streets, he learned quickly. It was during this period that Kelly's involvement with Dublin's criminal underworld began to solidify, as he quickly made connections with other local criminals and began to play a larger role in the networks that ran Dublin's streets. At this early stage, Kelly began to demonstrate leadership traits that would shape his future in organized crime. His organizational skills, ability to keep a low profile, and street smarts allowed him to gradually climb the ranks. He understood that survival in the criminal world was as much about relationships as it was about violence, and he began making alliances with key figures in Dublin's crime scene. By the 1970s, Kelly had become deeply entrenched in the city's criminal scene. He moved from small-time theft to more serious crimes, including armed robbery and organized heists. His expertise in planning and executing high-stakes robberies soon earned him a reputation as a skilled operator. He was methodical, strategic, and incredibly efficient in his operations, with a keen eye for avoiding the law. However, Kelly wasn't just any criminal. He was a leader, a strategist with a keen mind for managing operations, and he quickly climbed the ranks of Dublin's criminal elite. His growing reputation also brought with it power. He became a key player in Dublin's burgeoning criminal syndicates, making his name synonymous with organized crime in the city. Kelly was soon regarded as an influential figure, and his operations expanded beyond petty crime to include everything from extortion to smuggling. One of the pivotal moments in Kelly's rise was his relationship with the Irish National Liberation Army. While his activities were criminal in nature, his association with the INLA helped him gain protection and connections within the Irish Republican movement. Kelly forged strong alliances with paramilitary figures, which would become central to his empire. The INLA, though primarily a political organization, had deep ties to the criminal world, and Kelly's involvement with them allowed him to broaden his operations. It was during this time that Kelly began to mentor younger criminals who would later go on to run their own operations. Among his protégés were notorious figures such as Eamonn "the Don" Dunn, a future gangster leader who would become a significant figure in the Irish underworld, and Martin "Marlowe" Hyland, who would also rise to prominence. Kelly's influence and his ability to bring these individuals into the fold of organized crime ensured that his empire would continue to grow. By the early 1990s, Kelly had recognized the potential of the emerging drug market in Ireland. Cocaine, which had already begun to spread in Europe, was in high demand, but it had not yet fully established itself in Ireland. Kelly saw an opportunity to profit from the booming demand for illicit drugs, and he shifted his focus to drug trafficking. His entrance into the drug trade would solidify his status as one of Ireland's most notorious criminals. Kelly's first major drug trafficking operation involved the smuggling of nearly 1 kilogram of high-grade cocaine into Ireland. At the time, the value of the drugs was approximately 50,000 euros, an enormous sum for any single operation. This initial success allowed Kelly to expand his network of contacts and suppliers. As the demand for cocaine grew in Ireland, Kelly became one of the leading suppliers of the drug, cementing his position at the top of the criminal food chain. However, Kelly's involvement in the drug trade would also bring him into conflict with law enforcement, the Irish government, and rival criminal organizations. The increasing violence surrounding drug trafficking became a major concern, and Kelly's criminal activities started attracting the attention of both police and rival factions. His smuggling activities soon expanded beyond cocaine to include other drugs like heroin and ecstasy. Kelly had an uncanny ability to forge connections with international drug cartels, ensuring that his operations were well-funded and far-reaching. His skill in keeping a low profile while maintaining a vast and complex network allowed him to evade significant law enforcement attention for years. Upon his release from prison in 1998, after serving time for his involvement in cocaine trafficking, Eamonn Kelly quickly reasserted his dominance in the Dublin underworld. He reconnected with old associates and began managing a growing network of criminals who took on a variety of illicit operations, from smuggling to money laundering. Kelly had once again become a central figure in Dublin's criminal community, and his reputation remained unchallenged for the time being. But this period also saw increasing tensions between Kelly and rival factions, particularly as other criminal groups began to challenge his supremacy. The most significant of these rivals was the Real Irish Republican Army, a faction that had split from the INLA. The RIRA had their own political agenda, but like Kelly, they were also heavily involved in criminal enterprises, including drugs and extortion. Kelly's close association with Dessie O'Hare, a notorious figure in Dublin's underworld, only deepened the animosity between Kelly and the RIRA. Tensions escalated, and Kelly became the target of several assassination attempts, most notably in 2010 when a gunman opened fire on him in Kinsella, Dublin. Luckily, the weapon malfunctioned, and Kelly was left unharmed. But it was clear that Kelly was living on borrowed time, as enemies within the underworld and the paramilitary organizations that had once been his allies closed in on him. On December 4th, 2012, Eamonn Kelly was assassinated outside his home in Kinsella, Dublin. He was shot 3 times in the chest by a gunman who was believed to be associated with the new IRA. Kelly's death marked the violent end of a criminal dynasty and a turning point in the history of Dublin's underworld. The murder of Kelly left a power vacuum, with multiple criminal factions vying for control. His death was the result of the violent, ever-shifting allegiances within the criminal world, where loyalties could change in an instant. Kelly had spent decades building his empire, but in the end, It was his association with the wrong people and his involvement in violent conflicts that led to his demise. His legacy, however, remains deeply ingrained in the criminal history of Ireland. Kelly's influence and the empire he built left an indelible mark on Dublin's underworld. His mentorship of young criminals and his contributions to shaping the Irish drug trade cannot be overstated. His rise from humble beginnings to becoming one of the most feared and respected figures in Irish crime serves as a cautionary tale of ambition, power, and the consequences of living a life of crime. Eamonn Kelly's life story serves as a chilling reminder of the allure and dangers of the criminal world. From his humble beginnings in Summerhill to his rise as a godfather figure in Dublin's underworld, Kelly's journey was one of ambition, crime, and power. His involvement in the drug trade, mentorship of future crime lords, and his ability to navigate the dangerous world of criminal politics ensured that his legacy would endure long after his death. While many criminals come and go, Kelly's influence remains etched in the history of Dublin's underworld. His life story continues to be studied by those interested in the complexities of organized crime, and his name is still spoken with reverence and fear in the criminal world. Despite his violent death, Kelly's legacy lives on, a testament to the indelible mark he left on Dublin's criminal history. In the heart of Limerick, Ireland, a child was born into a world steeped in conflict and rebellion. Rose Lynch's early years were coloured by the tumult of the Troubles, a time when the streets buzzed with whispers of nationalism and dissent. Her father, Joe "Tiny" Lynch, was a prominent figure in the dissident Republican movement, the Continuity Irish Republican Army. From a young age, Rose was indoctrinated with tales of glory and sacrifice for the cause of Irish republicanism. Her home was a sanctuary for those who sought to further the agenda of armed struggle against British rule in Ireland. Tiny Lynch was a fierce advocate for Republican ideals, raising his children to revere the ideology of militant nationalism. He instilled in Rose a sense of duty, pride, and the belief that the fight for Irish independence was noble and necessary. As a child, she was encouraged to join Republican youth organizations and participate in community activities that promoted their cause. Rose's childhood was not filled with innocence. Instead, it was punctuated by meetings, marches, and a pervasive sense of purpose that would shape her future. By the age of 5, she was already selling Republican newspapers in the streets, proudly proclaiming her allegiance to the cause. As she grew older, her involvement deepened. She joined the women's group Cumann na Ban, learning the skills she would later employ in her violent endeavors. Her childhood friendships were forged in the fires of rebellion, and her teenage years were spent in the shadow of her father's expectations. The atmosphere was electric with the promise of struggle, and Rose absorbed every lesson her upbringing provided. As she entered adulthood, Rose Lynch became a staunch member of the IRA, fully embracing the militant lifestyle. The world outside her door was rife with violence, and she was determined to be a part of it. The thrill of clandestine operations, the adrenaline of planning missions, and the rush of adrenaline that accompanied the reality of violence became her new normal. With a pistol in her possession and a fierce determination in her heart, she felt invincible. By the time she was in her 30s, Rose had moved to Dublin, where the dissident Republican movement was gaining momentum. It was during this time that she began to forge a reputation as a formidable figure within the IRA. Her fervor and dedication to the cause set her apart, and she quickly climbed the ranks of the organization. But with her rise to prominence came an expectation for greater acts of violence and allegiance to the group's ideology. In November 2011, Rose's life would take a dark turn. Under the belief that she was acting in service of the IRA's mission, she received information that would forever alter the course of her life. Misguided intelligence led her to believe that David Darcy, a local delivery driver and father of 2, was involved in the murder of an IRA chief, Liam Kenny. In reality, Darcy was an innocent man, going about his daily life, unaware that he had become a target. On that fateful day, Rose approached Darcy's van with a sense of purpose and vengeance. Without hesitation, she fired multiple shots into the vehicle, hitting him 3 times in the head and upper body. In that moment, Rose Lynch became known as Ireland's first female assassin. As she stood over the lifeless body of David Darcy, the thrill of the act washed over her. It was a calculated decision, a supposed act of retribution for a crime that had never been committed by her victim. The murder sent shockwaves through the community. The IRA, believing they had achieved a significant blow against a perceived enemy, celebrated her actions, but the truth soon unraveled. Investigators quickly established that Darcy had no ties to criminal activity. He was a hard-working man, beloved by his family and community, and the brutal reality of his murder became painfully clear. Rose Lynch was arrested within weeks of the assassination. In a chilling display of defiance, she maintained her pride in her actions. During her trial, she declared herself a true volunteer, refusing to acknowledge any wrongdoing. The courtroom heard her twisted justifications as she clung to the belief that she had served her organization faithfully. Her lack of remorse left a deep scar on Darcy's family, who were left to mourn an innocent life cut short by a senseless act of violence. In April 2014, the Special Criminal Court found Lynch guilty of murder. The judge described the act as a premeditated, calculated, and cold-blooded murder. Rose was sentenced to life in prison, but her story was far from over. While incarcerated, she continued to espouse her beliefs, often boasting about her actions and the supposed righteousness of her cause. Her reputation as a hardliner within the prison walls grew, as did her delusions of grandeur. Limerick Prison became Rose Lynch's new reality. Initially, she was placed in solitary confinement due to the high-profile nature of her crime, but over time, she was integrated into the prison population. Here, she quickly garnered attention, not only for her infamy, but also for her attitude. As a self-proclaimed iconic Republican, Lynch attempted to maintain her persona, often throwing her weight around among fellow inmates. However, her bravado did not go unnoticed. In a turn of events, Rose found herself the target of another inmate's rage. During an altercation in the prison's E2 wing, she was attacked, resulting in a beating that left her bruised and humbled. The incident marked a significant shift in her demeanor. Once brash and defiant, she now spent more time in her cell, reflecting on her choices and the life that had led her to this point. The prison atmosphere was harsher than she had anticipated. Inmates and guards alike were wary of her, and as the novelty of her reputation wore off, she struggled to maintain her tough exterior. Behind the bars, Rose faced the reality of her actions and the devastation they caused. The name of David Darcy haunted her, a constant reminder of the innocent life she had extinguished. As the prison population swelled, Lynch was moved to share a cell with Lisa Smith, an ISIS member and former soldier. Their unlikely partnership drew attention, as both women had become symbolic figures in Ireland's troubled history of violence. Despite their differences, they found common ground in their defiance of the systems that had imprisoned them. Sharing a cell, they discussed their pasts, their beliefs, and their lives before incarceration. Smith had been convicted for her allegiance to a foreign terror organization, while Lynch's crime was rooted in the local violence of her homeland. The two women, once enemies in ideology, formed a bond, both described as model prisoners. The prison authorities took note of their camaraderie, and it was seen as a surprising development in the otherwise hostile environment of Limerick Prison. Lynch and Smith's shared experiences of extremism became a focal point for conversations about rehabilitation and redemption within the prison system. As they navigated the complexities of their situations, they began to challenge each other's beliefs and perceptions of their past actions. Years passed, and Rose Lynch found herself reflecting on her life, both before and after the murder of David Darcy. While she continued to insist that her actions were justified, the isolation of prison life began to chip away at her convictions. The prison walls echoed with the cries of families devastated by violence, and the silence of her cell became a canvas for her guilt and anger. Though she remained unrepentant publicly, internally, a transformation was underway. Lynch started to realize the futility of her past actions and the cycle of violence that had consumed her life and those around her. She grappled with the legacy she would leave behind: a daughter, a community, and a country burdened by the memories of bloodshed. As she navigated this internal conflict, the echoes of David Darcy's family resonated in her mind. They had been stripped of a father, a husband, and a friend due to her choices. Would she ever have the chance to seek forgiveness, or would she be forever imprisoned by her own actions? The story of Rose Lynch is not just a narrative of one woman's descent into violence, but also a reflection of a society grappling with its own demons. As she sits in her cell, she symbolizes the struggles of a generation caught in a cycle of revenge and hatred. Her story serves as a reminder of the fragility of life and the heavy toll of violence on both victims and perpetrators. Outside the prison walls, the legacy of the Troubles continues to haunt Ireland. Communities are still healing, families are still mourning, and the ghosts of the past linger in the shadows. Lynch's actions have contributed to a complex narrative of loss and tragedy, one that resonates through the lives of countless individuals. As Lynch reflects on her past, she is faced with an uncertain future. Her life sentence means that she will spend the foreseeable future behind bars, but the thoughts of what could have been linger in her mind. Would she have chosen a different path if given the opportunity? Would she have sought peace instead of vengeance? The answers remain elusive, lost in the labyrinth of her choices. The story of Rose Lynch serves as a cautionary tale, a narrative woven into the fabric of Irish history. It raises questions about identity, loyalty, and the cost of violence. As she navigates her life in prison, Rose is forced to confront the legacy she has created, one of bloodshed, loss, and a quest for meaning in a world overshadowed by conflict. In the end, Lynch's journey is not just about her own life. It is a reflection of a society that continues to grapple with its history, seeking a path towards reconciliation and understanding. The legacy of her actions will reverberate through generations, a stark reminder of the price of hatred and the importance of choosing peace over violence. And so, the story of Ireland's first female assassin unfolds, an intricate tapestry of upbringing, violence, remorse, and the longing for redemption, leaving behind a haunting echo that will linger long after the final chapter is written. Noel Duggan, also known by the moniker King Size, is a name that has become synonymous with organized crime in Ireland. His life, filled with high-stakes criminal enterprises, dangerous alliances, and a violent feud between two of Ireland's most notorious criminal families, is a tale of ambition, greed, and ultimately tragedy. Duggan's journey from a troubled youth in Dublin to one of Ireland's most feared and influential criminals is marked by his involvement in the cigarette smuggling trade, his connections with the Hutch crime family, and his tragic murder at the hands of the Kinahan cartel. His story remains one of intrigue and caution in the annals of Irish criminal history. Noel Duggan was born in the early 1970s in Dublin, Ireland, into a working-class family. While not much is known about his early years, Duggan's upbringing in the rough neighborhoods of Dublin likely played a key role in shaping his future. Growing up in an environment marked by social unrest, poverty, and violence, Duggan faced many challenges. Like many individuals raised in such conditions, he found himself drawn to a life of crime as a means of survival and, eventually, as a means of advancement. His early offenses were likely minor, such as burglaries and petty theft, but they set the foundation for the much darker path he would follow. Duggan's criminal activities were, in part, a product of the harsh Dublin streets and the rampant economic disparity. As he grew older, Duggan quickly realized that there were much larger opportunities for wealth and power in the world of organized crime. This realization would lead him into the dangerous world of smuggling and, later, to his affiliation with one of Ireland's most infamous criminal families. Duggan's early years seemed marked by struggles and adversities, but they were also foundational to his transformation into a prominent criminal figure. His connections to the underground world of Dublin's criminal scene would serve him well as he made his way up the ranks of the Irish underworld, gaining the trust and admiration of other key figures in the business. By the early 1990s, Noel Duggan's ambitions had grown, and so had the scope of his criminal activities. He became heavily involved in Ireland's cigarette smuggling trade, which at the time was a highly lucrative business. The practice involved importing large quantities of cigarettes into Ireland without paying the required taxes, resulting in a huge profit margin for those involved. It was an operation that required both smarts and discretion, and Duggan had both in abundance. His association with the smuggling trade allowed Duggan to amass significant wealth. However, unlike some of his counterparts who became embroiled in the physical labor of smuggling, Duggan was known for being a strategic figure in the operations, orchestrating the logistics behind the scenes. This allowed him to evade much of the risk involved, earning him a reputation as a shrewd and calculated criminal mastermind. Duggan's nickname, King Size, stemmed from his larger-than-life presence and his role in orchestrating one of Ireland's most prolific cigarette smuggling operations. His wealth grew rapidly as the cigarette smuggling trade flourished, and he soon became a key player within Ireland's organised crime scene. Duggan's success allowed him to build valuable relationships with other figures in the criminal underworld, most notably the Hutch crime family, a key player in Dublin's crime scene. However, despite his increasing wealth and power, Duggan managed to keep a relatively low profile. He was known to operate behind the scenes, often out of the public eye, while his criminal operations flourished. It was this ability to remain in the shadows while reaping the benefits of illicit trade that made Duggan an even more formidable figure in Ireland's criminal underworld. His growing wealth and influence made Duggan a valuable ally to those involved in organized crime, but it also made him an inevitable target for law enforcement. Despite facing several investigations into his activities, Duggan maintained a skillful ability to avoid arrest, remaining a free man despite his high-profile involvement in illicit operations. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Ireland's criminal landscape was dominated by two major families, the Hutch family and the Kinahan family. The rivalry between these two groups escalated into a violent feud that would leave a trail of bloodshed and destruction throughout the country. Duggan, whose involvement in the world of organized crime had grown over the years, became closely associated with the Hutch family. He had built up significant ties within the Hutch organization, a relationship that would prove to be both lucrative and deadly. The feud between the Hutch and Kinahan families became one of the most violent and well-documented gang wars in Ireland's history. The conflict was driven by control over drug trafficking, smuggling routes, and territory. Duggan's involvement with the Hutch family meant that he was thrust into the heart of the conflict. His strategic mind and experience in organizing criminal operations made him an asset to the Hutch side, and he played a key role in their operations. However, his involvement in this feud would eventually lead to his tragic downfall. The intense feud between the Hutch and Kinahan families was not only a battle for dominance over criminal enterprises, but also a deeply personal rivalry. The Kinahans were determined to eliminate anyone standing in their way, and Duggan, with his key role in the Hutch family, became a prime target. Duggan's connections to the Hutch family made him an even more prominent figure in the conflict, and as tensions between the two factions escalated, the risk to his life grew greater. In 2016, the violence between the two families reached a peak. The Kinahan cartel, determined to eliminate their rivals, had no qualms about using extreme violence to gain the upper hand. Duggan, as a major player in the Hutch organization, became a prime target. His position within the Hutch group made him an enemy of the Kinahan cartel, and it was only a matter of time before the brutal nature of the feud would catch up to him. On the morning of March 23, 2016, Noel Duggan's life came to a violent and tragic end. Duggan was shot and killed outside his home in Ratawath, County Meath. The murder was a targeted assassination, and it was widely believed to have been orchestrated by the Kinahan cartel. His death marked a significant moment in the Hutch-Kinahan feud, and it sent a clear message to the Hutch family and their associates. The circumstances surrounding Duggan's murder were chilling. He was gunned down in broad daylight outside his residence, an act that demonstrated the level of ruthlessness and brutality the Kinahan cartel was willing to employ in order to eliminate their enemies. Duggan's killing was described as a cowardly and callous act during his funeral, a reflection of the public's shock and disgust over the brutal nature of the crime. His death sent ripples through Ireland's criminal world, marking a major turning point in the ongoing conflict between the two families. Duggan's death was not just a loss for the Hutch family, but also a grim reminder of the violence and bloodshed that defined the criminal landscape in Ireland during that time. His death was a tragic culmination of a life spent in the pursuit of power, wealth, and control in a world built on crime and brutality. Despite Duggan's death, the ongoing feud between the Hutch and Kinahan families continued, fueled by anger, retaliation, and a desire for control. Duggan's murder did little to quell the violence, and his passing was but one chapter in a bloody saga that would stretch on for years. Following Duggan's murder, the violence between the Hutch and Kinahan families continued unabated. The killing of Duggan served as a catalyst for further retaliation and conflict between the two groups, with both sides continuing to target each other's members and associates. The feud between the families remained one of the most high-profile and dangerous criminal conflicts in Ireland, with several other individuals being killed in the following months and years. Duggan's death also brought attention to the wider issues of organised crime in Ireland, particularly the role of criminal families in smuggling, drug trafficking, and other illegal enterprises. Law enforcement agencies in Ireland continued to investigate the Kinahan cartel and the Hutch family, making arrests and attempting to dismantle their operations. However, the entrenched power of these criminal organizations proved difficult to challenge, and the violence associated with the feud persisted for years. Despite multiple law enforcement efforts to curtail the influence of the criminal families, Duggan's death demonstrated the deep roots these families had in the criminal world, making it difficult to disrupt their operations. Marking the end of Noel Duggan's life was the violent and untimely manner in which it occurred. Duggan's criminal legacy, particularly his role in the cigarette smuggling trade and his central position within the Hutch crime family, left an indelible mark on Ireland's criminal landscape. The aftermath of his murder served as a stark reminder of the deadly consequences of a life spent in organised crime. Duggan's story is one of ambition, ruthlessness, and tragedy. His rise from a petty criminal to one of Ireland's most influential and feared criminals was marked by his ability to avoid detection while making vast amounts of money. But his ties to the Hutch crime family, his role in the violent feud, and the ruthless Kinahan cartel ultimately sealed his fate. Duggan's life is a cautionary tale about the dangers of the criminal world and the price that many criminals pay when they become too entrenched in a life of violence. His legacy is also a stark reflection of the cycles of violence and bloodshed that have long plagued Ireland's criminal landscape. Duggan's name continues to echo as a symbol of both the opportunities and dangers that come with organised crime. Sean Quinn, born John Ignatius Quinn on 5th December 1947, was an Irish businessman from Derrylin, County Fermanagh, Northern Ireland. From humble beginnings in a farming family, Quinn grew to become one of the wealthiest individuals in Ireland, amassing a fortune of €4.7 billion at the height of his career. He was the founder of the Quinn Group, a diversified conglomerate with operations spanning across sectors such as cement, insurance, glass production, plastics, hotel management, and banking. However, his financial empire collapsed in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, resulting in bankruptcy, legal battles, and a tarnished legacy. This story of rapid rise and dramatic fall is a cautionary tale about the fragility of financial empires built on speculative investments and lack of transparency. Sean Quinn was born to Hugh and Elizabeth Quinn in County Fermanagh, Northern Ireland. His family's roots were in farming, with the Quinns owning a relatively small farm in the rural part of the county. Sean's father, Hugh Quinn, was known for his hard work, and Sean often cited him as a key influence in his own entrepreneurial drive. The Quinns weren't wealthy, and the land they worked on wasn't particularly fertile for traditional farming. However, the family did have access to natural resources, such as gravel deposits, which would become the foundation for Sean's future success. After his father passed away in 1967, Sean, at the age of 19, took over the running of the family farm. Recognizing that farming alone could not support him, Quinn decided to shift focus. In 1973, he used £100 borrowed from his mother to set up his first business, Quinn Quarries Limited, a gravel extraction business. This business grew steadily as Sean sold gravel to local builders. By the late 1970s, Sean began expanding his operations, investing in larger-scale machinery and opening additional quarries. His entrepreneurial instincts proved to be remarkably effective. As his gravel business flourished, Quinn began acquiring other related businesses in sectors such as concrete production and construction materials. This allowed him to diversify his holdings and spread risk, setting the stage for the eventual creation of the Quinn Group. In the 1980s, Quinn's business empire began to truly take shape. He expanded beyond gravel extraction and cement production, diversifying into various industries. One of his early major moves was the establishment of Quinn Cement, a cement manufacturing business that would grow into one of Ireland's leading cement producers. The expansion into cement production was strategic, as the Irish construction boom during the 1980s provided significant demand for building materials. By the 1990s, Quinn's business interests had grown significantly, and the Quinn Group was officially formed. Quinn was no longer just a regional businessman. His operations spanned across several key industries, including glass manufacturing, plastics, radiators, insurance, and hotels. In the 1990s, he also made his first move into the insurance sector, establishing Quinn Direct, an insurance company that grew rapidly to become one of Ireland's largest and most successful insurance providers. He capitalized on deregulation within the Irish insurance market, which allowed him to gain market share with competitive pricing strategies. He later expanded the Quinn Group into other financial services, including investment banking and health insurance, further bolstering his wealth and influence. One of Quinn's most significant ventures came in 2000 with the acquisition of Quinn Glass, a leading manufacturer of glass bottles and containers. This acquisition helped solidify the group's dominance in manufacturing and cemented Quinn's reputation as a successful businessman who was willing to take on big projects. By this time, the Quinn Group was operating across Ireland, the UK, Poland, and even Czech Republic, employing thousands of people across various industries. However, Quinn's success wasn't just a result of his business acumen. He had a powerful reputation in the community, which he used to gain valuable political and business connections. A passionate supporter of the Gaelic Athletic Association, Quinn's sponsorship of local teams helped cement his position as a well-respected figure, not only in business circles, but also in the communities where his companies operated. His philanthropy, including charitable donations to local sports clubs and hospitals, further enhanced his standing in Ireland. At the peak of his wealth, Sean Quinn was recognized as Ireland's wealthiest individual, with a net worth of approximately €4.7 billion. This placed him at the top of the Irish financial hierarchy. Quinn also began to acquire significant stakes in several large companies, including a 5% stake in Anglo-Irish Bank in 2007, just as Ireland's property market was booming. However, it was Quinn's growing investments in the banking sector that would eventually lead to his downfall. In an effort to expand his fortune, he took a significant speculative position in Anglo-Irish Bank, using contracts for difference, CFDs, which allowed him to take large leveraged bets on the price of the bank's shares. These CFDs gave him the ability to control more shares than he could afford with his available capital. In 2007, when the Irish property market began to show signs of instability, Quinn's investment in Anglo-Irish Bank became increasingly risky. As the property market collapsed in the wake of the global financial crisis of 2008, the value of Anglo-Irish Bank shares plummeted, causing massive losses for Quinn. These losses were compounded by Quinn's huge debt exposure to the bank and other financial institutions, as he had borrowed heavily against the value of his investments in the bank's shares. By 2008, as the global financial crisis took hold, the collapse of the Irish banking system became inevitable. Anglo-Irish Bank, which had been central to the Irish property boom, was effectively nationalised, and its shares became worthless. Quinn's fortune, built on highly speculative investments, was nearly entirely wiped out. In 2009, the Quinn Group began to face significant financial problems. The Irish Bank Resolution Corporation, which took control of the assets of Anglo-Irish Bank, started to pursue Quinn for €2.8 billion in debts. By 2010, the Quinn Group was in full-scale crisis, with the value of its assets diminishing rapidly. Quinn declared bankruptcy in 2011, and the Quinn Group was placed into liquidation. The liquidation process, which continued for several years, saw the sale of various Quinn assets, including Quinn Insurance, Quinn Cement, and Quinn Glass. This marked the end of an era for the Quinn Group, which had once been one of the largest privately owned conglomerates in Ireland. The bankruptcy left a significant portion of Ireland's banking system exposed to losses, and Irish taxpayers were forced to shoulder the burden of the bailout that kept the Anglo-Irish Bank afloat. At the same time, Quinn's personal bankruptcy proceedings and legal troubles grew increasingly complicated. Sean Quinn's post-bankruptcy life was marked by a series of legal challenges. In particular, the Irish authorities accused Quinn and his family of attempting to hide assets and wealth that could be used to pay off his debts. In 2012, Quinn was found to be in contempt of court for his failure to return assets to the IBRC, resulting in a 9-week jail sentence. In 2013, after Quinn's release from prison, a lengthy legal battle continued. The IBRC continued to pursue Quinn for the repayment of debts, and there were multiple accusations that Quinn had been engaged in asset stripping, particularly in terms of assets transferred to Russian and Cypriot subsidiaries of the Quinn Group. These complex offshore transactions raised further suspicions about the transparency of Quinn's business dealings and his attempts to shield assets from creditors. Meanwhile, his children, including Sean Quinn Jr., were questioned over financial transactions and payments made to them by companies associated with the Quinn Group. These transactions raised concerns that the Quinn family had illicitly moved wealth beyond the reach of creditors. Despite the financial collapse, Sean Quinn remained a beloved figure in his home county Cavan, where he continued to reside with his wife, Patricia, and their 5 children. He is still regarded by some as a local hero for his philanthropic efforts and his support of the GAA. However, Quinn's financial collapse and legal battles have overshadowed his earlier successes. His story has become a powerful example of how even the wealthiest individuals can see their fortunes evaporate in the face of speculative risk-taking, mismanagement, and market crashes. Today, Quinn's name is linked both to the remarkable growth of a business empire and its ultimate disastrous fall, making his life a case study in the volatile nature of modern capitalism. Sean Quinn's legacy is deeply mixed. Some still admire him for his entrepreneurial spirit and his ability to create jobs and wealth for thousands of people across Ireland. Others view him as a symbol of the excesses and reckless speculation that characterized the so-called Celtic Tiger era in Ireland, when rampant property speculation and banking deregulation led to an economic collapse that would take Ireland years to recover from. In summary, Quinn's rise from humble beginnings to Ireland's richest man, followed by his spectacular financial downfall and subsequent legal battles, underscores the fragility of wealth in an interconnected global economy. His story is a poignant reminder that success is often built on a foundation of calculated risks, and that those risks can have devastating consequences when the market turns. Declan "Whacker" Duffy is a controversial and complex figure in the criminal landscape of Northern Ireland. His life story intertwines with the turbulent history of paramilitary organizations, particularly the Irish National Liberation Army, and his eventual conviction for murder and involvement in several high-profile crimes. His journey from youth in armour to becoming one of the most notorious figures in Northern Ireland's criminal world paints a picture of both a troubled individual and a product of a troubled society. Declan Duffy was born in Armagh, Northern Ireland, in 1975. Growing up during the peak of the Troubles, the years marked by violent conflict between the nationalist and Republican community and Unionists and Loyalists, Duffy's early life was undoubtedly shaped by the sectarian violence surrounding him. The Troubles were not just a political conflict, but a way of life for many in Northern Ireland. Bombings, shootings, and clashes between the British Army and paramilitary groups were daily occurrences, and the atmosphere of tension and fear was inescapable. For many young people in nationalist areas like Armagh, joining a paramilitary group was seen as both a form of resistance to British rule and a means of protecting their community. These groups offered more than just an ideology. They provided a sense of belonging, purpose, and protection. For Duffy, the choice to join such a group would come at an early age, as the Irish National Liberation Army, a paramilitary organization with ties to republicanism, began to recruit individuals like him, individuals who felt the oppression and the desire to fight back against what they perceived as the injustices of the British government. Duffy's involvement with the INLA began during his teenage years in the early 1990s. The INLA was known for its ruthlessness and its involvement in both the armed struggle for Irish unification and organized crime, making it an ideal vehicle for someone like Duffy, whose troubled youth seemed to align with the group's violent agenda. It was around this time that he gained the moniker Whacker, a name that would become infamous across the Irish criminal underworld in the years to come. Duffy's early involvement with the INLA was not without its controversies. He quickly proved himself to be both brave and ruthless, traits that would later help him rise through the ranks of the group. His willingness to take on dangerous tasks for the INLA was evident in the numerous operations he took part in during his formative years with the organization. By the mid-1990s, Duffy had become more deeply entrenched in the INLA, participating in various operations aimed at furthering the organization's political agenda. The INLA role was multifaceted, engaging in both armed struggle and criminal enterprises to fund their activities. Much of the violence perpetrated by the INLA during this period targeted British forces, but they also clashed with rival groups, including the Provisional Irish Republican Army, who were fighting for similar objectives. Duffy's role in these violent activities was significant, although he remained in the shadows, operating more as a foot soldier than as an outright leader. His rise, however, was inevitable due to his growing ruthlessness, reliability, and his ability to navigate the complex and often deadly world of paramilitary politics. In 1999, Duffy became involved in one of the most notorious incidents of his early career, the hostage-taking at the Ballymount Industrial Estate. Duffy and several other INLA members held 6 individuals hostage, further escalating his profile in the Irish paramilitary underworld. The situation turned deadly when one of the hostages managed to alert authorities, leading to a confrontation where Duffy's fellow INLA member, Patrick Campbell, was fatally stabbed. This incident put Duffy on the map as one of the rising stars in the INLA, furthering his criminal and paramilitary notoriety. However, the 1990s were also marked by increasing challenges within the INLA. The rise of rival paramilitary groups and the splintering of old alliances threatened to destabilize the organization. It was in this environment that Duffy began to carve out his own path, taking on more leadership roles within the INLA and orchestrating violent actions against both the British and rival factions. As the 2000s dawned, Duffy's influence within the INLA expanded. The organization, which had initially been focused on political violence, increasingly turned to criminal activities to fund its operations. Duffy, who had honed his skills in armed robberies and violent attacks, began participating in large-scale smuggling operations. Cocaine and heroin smuggling routes were becoming highly lucrative, and the INLA was deeply involved in these illicit trades. As an individual with strong connections both within and outside the organization, Duffy became a key figure in the drug trade. However, it wasn't just drugs that brought Duffy into the spotlight. His violent nature and willingness to carry out extreme actions led to his involvement in multiple high-profile killings. In 2008, Duffy's involvement in a series of attacks on members of a gang led by Freddie Thompson, a notorious Dublin-based criminal, furthered his reputation as a ruthless enforcer in the criminal world. The attacks were believed to be part of a broader strategy by the INLA to assert dominance over the drug trade in Dublin and other parts of Ireland. It was during this period of increased violence that Duffy also became associated with several murders, including the killing of Sergeant Michael Newman in Derby, England in 1992. The murder, which had been part of a larger paramilitary operation, went unsolved for years. But in 2010, Duffy was convicted of the crime and sentenced to 24 years in prison. Duffy's rise to notoriety was abruptly interrupted when he was arrested and imprisoned for his role in various criminal activities, particularly the murder of Sergeant Newman. In 2009, he pleaded guilty to membership in the INLA, and his conviction marked a turning point in his life. His time in prison, however, would not be the end of his criminal activities. While incarcerated, Duffy continued to maintain ties with his former associates in the INLA and was involved in several violent incidents within the prison system. His connections to the wider criminal world meant that he could continue to exert influence from behind bars, making him a figure to be reckoned with even from prison. In 2013, Duffy was released from prison under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement, which allowed individuals associated with paramilitary groups to be freed early in exchange for promises of non-violence and cooperation with peace-building efforts. However, Duffy's release did not mark the end of his criminal career. Despite being freed in 2013, Duffy's legal troubles did not cease. In 2020, he was recalled to prison after breaching the terms of his license. His return to prison highlighted the ongoing issues of reintegration and rehabilitation faced by former paramilitaries, as well as the continued tension between former militant groups and the criminal justice system. In 2024, Duffy lost an appeal that would have allowed for his release. He is now scheduled to remain incarcerated until 2034. However, in early 2025, Duffy filed new legal action to demonstrate his suitability for early release. He challenged a decision by the Northern Ireland Prison Service that deemed him ineligible for pre-release testing, a process that would allow him to be considered for reintegration into society. Duffy's legal battle and his continued incarceration have sparked discussions about the broader issue of paramilitary reintegration in Northern Ireland. While some view him as a relic of the past, others argue that his continued imprisonment is part of the ongoing struggle to deal with the legacies of the Troubles and the difficulties of balancing justice, peace, and accountability in a post-conflict society. The story of Declan "Whacker" Duffy is one of complexity and contradiction. A man born into a world defined by conflict, Duffy's early life and involvement in paramilitary organizations were shaped by the violent politics of the Troubles. Over the years, his transformation from a young militant to a ruthless criminal mastermind has made him one of the most notorious figures in Northern Ireland's criminal history. Though his criminal activities have left a trail of violence and bloodshed, Duffy's involvement with the INLA and his actions during the Troubles will forever be intertwined with the larger narrative of Northern Ireland's struggle for identity and political autonomy. His life story reflects the blurred lines between political activism, criminality, and the desire for power. As his legal battles continue and his reputation looms large in both the criminal and paramilitary landscapes, Duffy's name will remain part of the complex story of Northern Ireland's past, marked by violence, redemption, and the ongoing struggles of a society attempting to move forward. Whether he will ever find peace or reconciliation remains uncertain, but the shadow of Declan Duffy's life will continue to loom large in the annals of Irish criminal history. Thomas Ashe Mellon, a 48-year-old dissident Republican from Derry, has emerged as a pivotal figure within the new IRA after the imprisonment of several key leaders. His rise to power has not been without controversy, as scrutiny increases regarding his effectiveness and the motivations behind his leadership in a complex landscape marked by ongoing violence and political tension. Mellon grew up steeped in the Republican ideology prevalent in Northern Ireland, deeply influenced by a familial legacy that intertwines with past paramilitary activities. His upbringing instilled a fierce sense of pride in the Republican cause, shaping his identity as a political activist and community leader. Following the arrests of high-ranking new IRA figures involved in a significant MI5 operation known as Operation Arbacia, which led to charges against 9 individuals for directing terrorism, Mellon stepped into a leadership role. His elevation came at a time when the organization faced existential threats, necessitating a figure to rally the remaining members. However, since taking charge, Mellon has confronted a multitude of challenges that have led to doubts about his capabilities. His leadership has been punctuated by a series of operational failures that have raised eyebrows, and questions about his ability to command respect and loyalty from within the ranks. Sources within the organization suggest that Mellon struggles to inspire confidence, particularly among seasoned members who have witnessed more effective campaigns in the past. Since assuming leadership, Mellon is alleged to have sanctioned 3 major operations, 1 in Dungiven and 2 in Tyrone, all of which resulted in failure. These operations, once seen as vital initiatives for the new IRA, have turned into points of contention among the ranks. One notable incident involved a failed mortar attack on a police vehicle in Strabane, which not only failed but was labelled an embarrassment by insiders. This incident highlighted the growing disconnect between Mellon's commands and the operational realities faced by the organization. As confidence in Mellon's leadership dwindles, reports indicate that his focus has shifted from achieving operational success to maintaining a public image. Critics within the new IRA assert that he appears more interested in participating in protests and public displays, such as the Easter parades in Dublin and Derry, than effectively leading the organization. A source remarked, "It's all about getting his face in the papers," emphasizing a growing sentiment that Mellon is failing to deliver on the responsibilities expected of him as a leader. The perception that Mellon is primarily focused on self-promotion rather than substantive action has led to increasing frustration among committed members of the new IRA. This has sparked discussions about the future direction of the organization, as many question whether they can rely on his leadership to achieve their goals in a tumultuous political climate. The atmosphere within the new IRA has become one of distrust and uncertainty regarding Mellon's capability to lead effectively. A significant turning point occurred when 4 members of the leadership reportedly voiced their lack of faith in him. Such internal dissent is particularly dangerous for any leader, as it undermines the unity and strength needed in a paramilitary organization, especially in a time when the group faces heightened scrutiny from law enforcement. Mellon's leadership has coincided with an increase in arrests among new IRA members. Many believe this uptick is directly tied to his inability to navigate the complexities of modern operational demands. As arrests pile up, confidence in Mellon's organizational skills diminishes, and sources indicate that many members now question whether he is truly equipped to lead the group through an era of increased scrutiny and law enforcement pressure. The growing sentiment within the organization is one of frustration. Members feel that Mellon's leadership has not only led to operational failures, but also has jeopardized the safety and security of those still actively involved in the struggle. Members express concern that under his command, the group is more vulnerable than ever, facing greater risks from law enforcement as they attempt to continue their activities. Mellon's legal troubles have further compounded his difficulties as a leader. Recently, he faced charges for breaching anti-terrorism legislation after crossing the border into the Republic of Ireland to purchase diesel at a garage that straddles both sides of the border. Specifically, the prosecution noted that he crossed the border without permission, which he is prohibited from doing under the anti-terrorism legislation. Mellon admitted to the breach in Derry Magistrates' Court and received a conditional discharge for a period of 12 months. This incident has sparked conversations about how the law treats individuals in the context of the ongoing conflict. Many within the Republican community view Mellon's legal issues as a reflection of the broader societal struggles faced by individuals living in areas heavily affected by policing and military presence. The complexities of cross-border activities in a post-Brexit landscape have made it even more challenging for those engaged in dissident activities to navigate legal boundaries, raising questions about fairness and the ongoing impact of conflict on daily life. As public attention grows, there are fears that Mellon's legal challenges will further tarnish the reputation of the new IRA and fuel negative perceptions of the organization among both the public and potential recruits. This situation adds pressure on Mellon to not only prove his leadership capabilities, but also to manage the organization's image amidst increasing scrutiny. As Mellon grapples with his leadership position, the implications for young people in Derry remain critical. Many youths in the region face significant challenges, including high unemployment rates, educational disparities, and a lack of opportunity. These conditions make them particularly vulnerable to recruitment by armed organizations like the new IRA, perpetuating a cycle of violence and despair. The impact of these challenges is evident in the number of young people who have become disillusioned with traditional political processes and are drawn toward more radical solutions. Many see the new IRA as a way to express their frustrations and seek change, despite the risks involved. However, the organization's recent failures may serve as a cautionary tale for these young individuals, highlighting the potential futility of armed struggle in the face of changing political dynamics. There is a growing recognition among some factions within the Republican movement that addressing the underlying socio-economic issues facing young people is essential to breaking this cycle. Critics argue that instead of demonizing youth involved in dissident activities, society must engage in meaningful conversations about their future and the potential for positive change. This sentiment echoes the call for a renewed focus on community engagement and addressing the root causes of unrest in order to foster a more peaceful society. Thomas Mellon's story is emblematic of the ongoing struggles within the new IRA and the broader challenges faced by the Republican movement. His leadership, marked by operational failures, legal troubles, and internal dissent, raises critical questions about the future of dissident republicanism. As the younger generation grapples with socio-economic challenges, the choices made by Mellon and his contemporaries will profoundly impact the community's future. The hope remains that through dialogue and positive engagement, a more peaceful and prosperous future can be realized for all, moving away from the shadows of the past. If the new IRA can navigate these turbulent waters effectively, there may still be a chance for the organization to redefine its role in a rapidly changing society, creating a legacy that aligns with the aspirations of both its members and the broader community. Nathan Kinsella's story begins in the tumultuous landscape of Dublin during the early 2000s. Born into a society grappling with economic hardship and social unrest, Kinsella's early years were marked by the complexities of urban life in Ireland. His entry into the world of crime came through his association with the Real IRA, a splinter group that rejected the peace process and sought to continue the armed struggle against British rule. The Real IRA was known for its radical ideology and violent tactics, setting itself apart from other paramilitary groups by focusing on attacks against both the British state and those they deemed as collaborators. Kinsella, driven by a combination of ideological fervor and personal ambition, quickly aligned himself with this faction. His rise through the ranks was not without challenges. He had to navigate the dangerous world of paramilitary politics, often marked by internal rivalries and violent power struggles. Kinsella's early involvement was characterized by his role in orchestrating violent acts, extorting businesses, and managing arms trafficking operations. His activities were not just a means of earning money, but were intertwined with a broader strategy to establish and maintain power within the organization. This period of his life laid the foundation for his later criminal enterprises and shaped his reputation as a ruthless and efficient operative. By the mid-2000s, Nathan Kinsella's growing influence caught the attention of Jimmy Mansfield Jr., a wealthy and influential figure in Dublin's criminal underworld. Mansfield Jr. and his family had established a significant empire, and their business interests spanned various sectors, including real estate and construction. However, their empire was increasingly entangled with criminal activities, and they needed strong connections to maintain and expand their operations. Kinsella's entry into Mansfield Jr.'s sphere marked a significant turning point. Mansfield Jr. sought Kinsella's expertise to manage and protect his business interests amidst growing threats and competition. This partnership was forged out of necessity, with Kinsella providing the muscle and connections needed to safeguard Mansfield's assets and enforce his will. Their collaboration involved a range of illicit activities, including money laundering, extortion, and violent enforcement actions. Kinsella's role was crucial in managing these operations, utilizing his network within the Real IRA to provide the necessary support and intimidation required. The partnership was mutually beneficial. Mansfield Jr. gained protection and expanded his influence, while Kinsella leveraged Mansfield's resources to further his own criminal enterprises. The death of Alan Ryan in 2012 was a watershed moment for Nathan Kinsella. Ryan, a prominent leader within the Real IRA, was killed in a violent confrontation, leading to a significant power vacuum within the organization. Ryan's death triggered a period of intense internal conflict, as various factions within the Real IRA vied for control and influence. Kinsella, having been closely associated with Ryan, found himself at the center of this turmoil. His position became increasingly precarious, as rival factions challenged his authority and sought to undermine his influence. During this period, Kinsella was involved in several violent confrontations, including an attempted assassination that left him wounded. Despite these setbacks, Kinsella managed to navigate the chaotic environment and maintain his standing within the organization. His survival during this period was a testament to his resilience and adaptability. He emerged from this phase with a reinforced sense of determination and a deepened commitment to his criminal activities. By 2018, Nathan Kinsella had secured a lavish residence in Blackrock, an affluent suburb of Dublin. This move represented a significant shift in his lifestyle and marked a new phase in his criminal career. The mansion, acquired through a complex arrangement involving a front builder named Jerry McGreevy, was emblematic of Kinsella's attempts to project an image of success and legitimacy. The Blackrock property was more than just a residence. It served as a central hub for Kinsella's ongoing criminal activities. The mansion's opulence was a stark contrast to the violent and chaotic world Kinsella had previously inhabited. It became a base for laundering money, coordinating criminal operations, and maintaining connections with other criminal elements. The choice of Black Rock, known for its affluent residents and prestigious reputation, was strategic. Kinsella aimed to distance himself from his past associations and present a veneer of respectability. However, the mansion quickly attracted attention from law enforcement and investigators, who were keenly aware of Kinsella's criminal background and the dubious nature of his financial dealings. Between 2018 and 2020, Nathan Kinsella was deeply involved in a sophisticated money laundering operation. Over this 2-year period, approximately €230,000 flowed through various accounts under Kinsella's control. The operation was designed to obscure the origins of the money and integrate it into legitimate financial channels. Kinsella's involvement in the money laundering scheme was complex and involved multiple layers of transactions. He utilized a network of shell companies and front organizations to manage and conceal the funds. This elaborate scheme was not just a means of avoiding detection, but a way to further his criminal enterprises and secure additional resources. Kinsella's claim that the money was given to him by a wealthy individual as a gift was met with skepticism. Given his criminal background and the nature of the funds, investigators were highly dubious of his explanation. The complexity of the money laundering operation and the substantial amounts of money involved pointed to a well-organized and deliberate effort to evade legal scrutiny. As investigations into Kinsella's activities intensified, he found himself embroiled in a series of legal challenges. The charges against him included money laundering and failure to pay capital acquisitions tax, a serious financial crime that carried significant penalties. Kinsella's legal strategy involved negotiating a guilty plea in hopes of reducing his exposure to more severe charges. The courtroom proceedings were highly charged, with Kinsella attempting to present himself as a victim of circumstance rather than a perpetrator of crime. His defense argued that the charges were exaggerated and that he was being unfairly targeted. Despite these efforts, the evidence against Kinsella was overwhelming, and he was ultimately convicted. The legal battles highlighted the complexities of dealing with financial crimes and the challenges of navigating the criminal justice system. Kinsella's guilty plea resulted in financial penalties and a tarnished reputation, marking a significant setback in his criminal career. Nathan Kinsella's decline was marked by a series of personal and professional setbacks. The once prominent figure in Dublin's criminal world found himself facing the consequences of his actions. The Blackrock mansion, once a symbol of his success, became a reminder of his downfall. Kinsella's attempts to reinvent himself as a legitimate businessman were overshadowed by his criminal past. His involvement in the money laundering operation and the subsequent legal battles led to a significant erosion of his influence and resources. The collapse of his criminal empire was a stark reminder of the volatile and unpredictable nature of life in organized crime. The sentencing phase of Kinsella's legal troubles underscored the dramatic reversal of fortune. The lavish lifestyle he once enjoyed was replaced by legal and financial difficulties, marking the end of an era for Kinsella and his criminal activities. As the Kinahan-Hutch feud intensified, Kinsella's name resurfaced in connection with violent events. Eamonn Kelly, a hitman for the Kinahan cartel, was serving a life sentence for the murder of Michael Barr, a key figure in the feud. Barr's murder was part of a broader conflict that saw multiple killings linked to the Kinahan-Hutch rivalry. Kelly, who was serving time in Portlaoise prison, had a vendetta against Kinsella. He accused Kinsella of attacking his mother's home on the night Barr was killed. This accusation further complicated Kinsella's situation and led to heightened tensions within the prison. In July 2023, Kinsella was transferred from Port Leash Prison to a Midlands facility. The decision came after Cumberton made it clear to prison authorities that he intended to harm Kinsella. The authorities, recognizing the immediate threat, acted swiftly to separate the two inmates. Kinsella had only just handed himself over to serve a 1-year sentence for failing to pay taxes on substantial sums of money he claimed were gifts. The move to the Midlands was a precautionary measure to ensure Kinsella's safety, reflecting the complex and dangerous nature of his criminal past. The transfer underscored the ongoing conflicts and vendettas that defined Kinsella's life, and highlighted the broader issues of violence and retribution within the criminal landscape. Nathan Kinsella's story is a compelling narrative of ambition, crime, and eventual downfall. His rise from a key figure in the real IRA to a convicted criminal reflects broader themes within organized crime and its transient nature. Kinsella's journey highlights the risks and consequences associated with operating in the criminal underworld. As investigations into his activities continue and his sentencing is finalized, Kinsella's story serves as a cautionary tale. His legacy, marked by both criminal success and ultimate failure, offers insights into the shifting dynamics of organized crime and the challenges faced by those who operate within its confines. The broader implications of his story reflect the ongoing evolution of criminal enterprises and the enduring impact of legal and financial accountability. By the mid-1990s, Ireland's underworld had reached global attention. The Hutch-Kinahan feud would eventually claim nearly 20 lives in just 3 years, grabbing headlines across the world. Yet to understand how Dublin reached that point, one must look back to the late 1970s and 1980s. A period when organized gangland murder first took root. The 1960s and early 1970s had certainly seen criminal gangs armed with guns, mainly for robberies or to intimidate rivals. But murders carried out in the calculated style of a gangland hit were rare. The first recognizable wave of such killings began in 1978. Between 1978 and 1989, at least 13 individuals were murdered in Dublin in deliberate underworld attacks. They were not police officers, security guards, or civilians caught up in robberies, nor were they casualties of paramilitary feuds. These were targeted killings, nearly all carried out with firearms, and they marked the birth of Dublin's bloody gangland era. The victims ranged from a 15-year-old schoolboy to hardened criminals in their 40s. Their murders took place across the capital, in Ballymon's tower blocks, the pubs of the inner city, suburban estates in Crumlin, and quiet roadsides from Killester to Blanchardstown. The stories that follow are not intended to glorify the men involved. Rather, they are a record of Dublin's violent underworld, a landscape of vanished pubs, demolished flats, and names remembered only by family, friends, and those who lived through the era. Christy Macaulay was a young man already known to the guards. Living at 38 Millbrook Road, Kilbarrack, he had been arrested in 1976 on suspicion of conspiring to import arms. Though the charge did not lead to a conviction, it placed him firmly in the sights of investigators. The following year, he was fined for possession of cannabis and cocaine. Guards also suspected him of involvement in several armed robberies around Dublin. On the night of 19th March 1978, Macaulay went to the Celebrity Club, a popular night spot on Upper Abbey Street. There he encountered fellow criminal Eamonn Sorin, a 36-year-old with a long history in Dublin's underworld. Sorin was accompanied by Lawrence "Clicky" Maguire. Macaulay agreed to give the pair a lift home. As Macaulay's car reached the junction of Craigford Avenue and Killester Avenue, Sorin asked him to stop. Without warning, Sorin drew a .32 caliber automatic pistol and shot Macaulay twice in the head. Remarkably, Macaulay managed to open the door and stagger onto the road. Sorin followed and fired 2 more shots, finishing him off. The motive was rooted in paranoia. Sorin, while on the run, had convinced himself that Macaulay had been sleeping with his girlfriend. In reality, Macaulay was gay, but Sorin's suspicion proved fatal. Sorin was eventually arrested in July 1981 and charged with the murder, yet the case fell apart. Lawrence Maguire, the prosecution's key witness, refused to give evidence and even served a month in prison for contempt. When the trial was rescheduled, Maguire again failed to appear. With no testimony, the case collapsed. Though he escaped justice in Ireland, Sorin's violent career caught up with him abroad. He was extradited to England, where in 1983 he was sentenced to life for the murder of his former neighbour Kenneth Adams in Birmingham, a crime dating back to 1972. Sorin's reputation lived on in books about Dublin crime. Sean Flynn and Padraig Yates in Smack, 1985, described him as a well-known robber from Liberty House. Paul McWilliams later credited him in Bad Fellas, 2011, as one of the first to smuggle commercial shipments of cannabis and heroin from Amsterdam into Ireland. The Macaulay family continued to feel the ripple effects of gangland violence. In September 1981, Christie's brother Anthony was shot and wounded in O'Neill's pub on Summerhill Parade when two masked gunmen opened fire with a pistol and shotgun. 3 other men were injured. Guards described the attack as linked to a gangland feud. The killing of Christy Macaulay stands as one of Dublin's earliest true gangland hits, cold-blooded, personal, and left unresolved in the courts. By 1979, Basil English was no stranger to the criminal courts. Living at 95 Harmonstown Road, Artane, he had been in and out of trouble since the mid-1960s. With a record stretching back over 15 years, he had become a fixture in Dublin's underworld. On the evening of the 25th of April, 1979, English's criminal past caught up with him. As he entered the doorway of an 8-story flat block at 184 Sillag Road, Ballymun, he was ambushed. A gunman fired a single shot at point-blank range, striking him through the head. English, just 33 years old, was rushed to hospital but pronounced dead on arrival. Newspapers quickly described the killing as a gangland slaying. Guards believed it was connected to an internal feud within Dublin's underworld. The prime suspect was Thomas "Tommy" Tyrrell, a 21-year-old from Artane. Tyrrell reacted to the murder by barricading himself inside a Ballymun flat for 5 days, threatening to harm himself if guards attempted entry. Eventually, he surrendered. The motive was thought to have both criminal and personal elements. Tyrrell was dating English's former girlfriend, and jealousy may have fueled the violence. Reports suggested both men were heavily intoxicated that night. Tyrrell was charged with manslaughter and possession of a revolver. After psychiatric evaluation, he was sentenced to 3 years for manslaughter and an additional 2 for firearm possession, serving only 2 years in total. But prison did not end his violent trajectory. In February 1982, only weeks after his release, Tyrrell shot and wounded Edward Charles McGuinness with a shotgun in Ballymun. Convicted of malicious wounding, he received 4 years in prison. The killing of English illustrated the volatility of Dublin's underworld at the time. Personal disputes blended with gang rivalries, fueled by alcohol and easy access to firearms. Christy Shannon lived at 3 Shangan Gardens, Ballymun, with his wife Breda and their 7 children. Originally from Lower Dorset Street, Shannon's life was marked by instability and criminal activity. In September 1977, his wife Breda went missing after leaving a rehabilitation centre for alcohol dependency in Athy, County Kildare. For 2 years, she vanished from public life, leaving her husband to raise their children alone. On the 18th of October 1979, Shannon's own life ended violently. His body was discovered inside a stolen Ford Granada in a laneway behind the Nally stand at Croke Park. He had been shot twice in the face and neck at point-blank range with a shotgun. The investigation was extensive. Guards interviewed between 400 and 500 people, considering as many as 30 suspects. Eventually, they arrested Lawrence "Larry" Cummins, a career criminal from Summerhill Parade. Evidence linked Cummins to the murder weapon. Keys to the stolen Granada were found in his home, and he admitted lending his shotgun and car to an associate, Frank Hughes. Cummins claimed Hughes told him Shannon was dangerous and there was only one way to finish him. At trial, Cummins admitted Hughes later told him he had done the message, meaning Shannon had been killed. Despite this, the first jury failed to reach a verdict, and in a retrial in 1982, Cummins was acquitted. Hughes was never formally charged. Meanwhile, the mystery of Breeder Shannon's disappearance was partly resolved. Guards traced her to London in late 1979. Reports suggested she refused to comment on her husband's activities. It appeared she had abandoned her family 2 years earlier, leaving Christie to drift deeper into the criminal world. Shannon's murder remains unsolved. Cummins himself went on to serve multiple prison sentences in the 1980s and 1990s. In 2006, he received 15 years for his role in the armed robbery and shooting of publican Charlie Chalky. He died in prison in 2009. The Shannon case, with its abandoned family, vanished wife, and unsolved execution, captured the bleakness of Dublin's gangland landscape at the end of the 1970s. Jackie Kelly lived at 9 St Andrew's Court, off Fenian Street, with his wife and their baby son. For 8 years, he worked as a postman at the GPO before changing jobs to become a dispatcher for a taxi firm. Friends and neighbours described him as a family man who had little to do with the violent underworld that dominated Dublin headlines. On the evening of the 17th of September 1980, Kelly went to Grace's pub on Townsend Street to watch a UEFA Cup football match on television. The bar was busy, with around 15 patrons inside. Kelly sat by the window with 2 friends. At 10:50 p.m., the door opened and a man wearing a motorcycle helmet strode inside. Without a word, he drew a .32 caliber pistol and opened fire on Kelly at close range. Kelly was hit multiple times. The gunman left the pub, but seconds later, he returned. Walking back through the door, he fired again into Kelly's body as he lay wounded, ensuring death. Witnesses described a scene of shock and terror as the assassin fled. Nearby, guards found a discarded motorcycle helmet, mask, and jacket in a laneway, along with a sawn-off shotgun that was not used in the attack. The pistol was later recovered from a council dump in Ballyogan. Kelly was rushed to St Vincent's Hospital. Though gravely injured, he remained conscious for several days and was able to make statements to guards before dying 10 days later. Despite these statements, the investigation went nowhere. Guards publicly stated that Kelly had no known involvement with crime, which only deepened the mystery. Newspapers later speculated that the killing may have been a favour carried out by a notorious South Dublin criminal, but no clear motive ever emerged. For Kelly's widow, the murder was devastating. Left to raise their son alone, she gave interviews to newspapers insisting Jackie had been targeted in error. In the years following, Grace's pub was burned down in a suspicious fire, one of several such blazes that hit pubs in the area. Some suggested these were linked to protection rackets, but guards never confirmed it. Kelly's death remains one of the most baffling of Dublin's early gangland killings, a calculated public execution of a man without known underworld ties. Gerard Morgan lived with his family at 22 Lismore Road in Crumlin. He was a teenager with no known criminal record, but his older brother Alan, 17, had reportedly fallen out with a criminal gang over missing proceeds from a bank robbery in Drumcondra earlier that year. On the afternoon of the 26th of May, 1982, Gerard came to the front door of his home when gunfire erupted. He was shot dead instantly. It is believed that the attack was intended for his older brother Alan, making Gerard an unintended victim of the gang feud. This was not the first time the Morgan household had been targeted. Earlier, on the 9th of March 1982, 5 shots had been fired at the family home in a previous attack. The Gardaí quickly began investigating the murder. Patrick Conroy was later sentenced to 7 years in 1983 for being an accessory to the killing, having provided shelter to the gunman. Another suspect, Michael McDonnell, was arrested for Gerard's murder, but the state dropped the charge and he was never convicted. Gerard's death shocked the Crumlin community. A teenager caught in the crossfire of gangland disputes highlighted the ruthless and indiscriminate nature of criminal feuds in Dublin during the early 1980s. His funeral was a somber affair, and locals spoke of the fear that hung over families living near the city's gang conflicts. The killing of Gerard Morgan sent a clear warning. Even those on the periphery of Dublin's underworld were not safe from the violence that was becoming an increasingly common feature of the city's gangland landscape. Anthony Hopkins lived at 58 George's Place, Dorset Street. He was a young man involved in Dublin's growing gangland conflicts and had become caught up in a clash between rival factions at the Jetfoil pub on the North Wall Quay on the night of the 28th of December, 1982. Later that evening, Hopkins joined a group of about a dozen men travelling in 2 cars to a block of flats at St. Bridget's Gardens, Sheriff Street. As the men approached, a shotgun was fired through a glass panel from one of the flats, striking Hopkins in the face. He was rushed to hospital but succumbed to his injuries 3 days later, on the 31st of December, 1982. The tragedy was compounded when his mother passed away just weeks later, on the 27th of January, 1983. The guards quickly launched an investigation. Michael Dooner, aged 20, of 43 Line Gardens, Raheny, was arrested in connection with the incident. He admitted to supplying the shotgun used in the attack, but denied firing the fatal shot himself. At the Central Criminal Court, Dooner was sentenced to 3 years for manslaughter in 1984. At the time, he was already serving a 4-year sentence for aggravated burglary and other offences, reflecting his deep involvement in Dublin's criminal underworld. The killing of Tony Hopkins highlighted the indiscriminate nature of gang violence during the early 1980s. Young men like Hopkins, often drawn into conflicts over loyalty or territory, were frequently at risk, underscoring the brutal reality of Dublin's gangland feuds. Gerard Horrigan lived on Balbutcher Lane, Ballymun, with his wife and child. He had earned a reputation as a small-time hash dealer working under the local criminal Dave Myler Brogan. Horrigan reportedly used local teenagers to distribute Brogan's drugs from a social club in the basement of Joseph Plunkett Tower, while Brogan's gangland partners included serious figures from Swords with former Irish Republican paramilitary links. In January 1983, Myler was arrested in France during a drugs investigation. Horrigan saw his boss's absence as an opportunity to expand his own operations, sourcing and distributing hash on a larger scale. When Myler returned to Dublin, he sacked Horrigan for overstepping his boundaries. Horrigan attempted to forge ties with the Dunn crime family, but was rebuffed, viewed as a minor player in the city's underworld. Frustrated, Horrigan and his crew broke into Myler's parents' home in North Strand, searching for hidden drug money. On 7th April 1983, he and an accomplice stole Myler's BMW outside the Penthouse pub in Ballymun and rammed it into a wall. Reports also placed Horrigan and an associate, both armed, in Swords, asking questions about Myler's business partners, further evidence he had overstepped his role. On 9th of April 1983, Horrigan went on a city centre pub crawl with his brother John and 2 friends, visiting the Metro on Parnell Street and Bow Derrells in Smithfield. They left at approximately 11:45 p.m. and drove back to Ballymun. As they approached the entrance to the social club in the basement of Plunkett Tower, a motorbike pulled up. Its armed passenger jumped off, drew a gun, and fired at Horrigan. He fled for cover into the basement, but the gunman pursued him and shot him dead in front of several witnesses inside the club. No arrests were ever made, and the killing remained unsolved. Horrigan's death illustrated the brutal enforcement methods used in Dublin's gangland scene during the early 1980s, particularly against those who challenged more established criminal hierarchies. Daniel McCowan was originally from Rory O'Connor House, Hardwicke Street Flats, in Dublin's North Inner City. In September 1972, he was sentenced to 2 years for possession of explosives and ammunition. A former member of the armed Republican group, Sia Eyre, he had signed a 1973 statement severing ties with the organization due to the presence of undesirable elements. In the mid to late 1970s, McCowan became associated with the INLA. In April 1978, he was arrested alongside Thomas Savage of Swords for car theft and possession of a wire cutter, receiving a 3-year sentence in December 1980. After his release in early 1983, McCowan purchased a £50,000 note red brick bungalow in Cloggertown, Clonelvie, Ashbourne, County Meath, where he lived with his wife and 2 sons. Ambitious to establish himself in organised crime, he formed a criminal group nicknamed the Gang of Six, recruiting both old associates and new contacts. He was reportedly involved in planning a major cash van robbery on the Swords Road, en route from Belfast to the central bank in Dublin, but the plan was aborted when the gang discovered the van was heavily escorted by the Irish Army. Despite living on the Meath-Dublin border, McCowan continued to make weekly trips into the city to collect his social welfare payments. On the 14th of June 1983, as he left the Labour Exchange on North Cumberland Street, he was shot 4 times. Several people were questioned in connection with the murder, but no one was ever convicted. McCowan's killing highlighted the dangerous intersection of former paramilitary networks and emerging organised crime in Dublin during the early 1980s. His ambition to climb the gangland hierarchy ultimately made him a target, demonstrating the lethal consequences of involvement in the city's criminal underworld. Edward Hayden was a former light middleweight boxing champion who had fought for Ireland in the early 1970s. His nephew would go on to become the famed boxer Bernard Dunn. By the early 1980s, Hayden had turned to crime and was described in Smack as a mid-ranking heroin pusher. In October 1983, he had been acquitted on charges of heroin possession. Hayden was a married father of 3, but lived alone at 5 Sherrard Court, Portland Place, off Dorset Street. On the night of the 26th of December 1983, at around 11:40 p.m, Hayden was shot dead by a lone gunman outside a flat on Dunn Street, Ballybough. The flat reportedly belonged to a former girlfriend, though it remains unclear whether the attack had a personal motive or was linked solely to his criminal activity. Several people were arrested in connection with the murder, but no convictions were ever secured. Hayden's death sent shockwaves through Dublin's criminal and sporting communities. His family acknowledged the support and sympathy they received from Arbor Hill Boxing Club and friends in local pubs including Madigan's, Talbot Street, Lloyd's, Amiens Street, Scanlon's, Parnell Street, and Carr's, Stoneybatter, in the Evening Herald on the 18th of February 1984. The killing of Eddie Hayden reflected the dangerous overlap of Dublin's sporting figures and the city's heroin trade in the 1980s, illustrating how even well-known local personalities could become victims of gangland violence. Patrick Garland was a small-time criminal from Captain's Road, Crumlin, known for his skill at forging checks. He had a history of convictions for fraud, acting under false pretenses, and assault on his ex-wife. At the time of his disappearance, Garland had been living at a guest house on 69 Lower Gardner Street, Dublin, and regularly frequented pubs in the Parnell Street and Lower Gardner Street areas. Garland was last seen by friends on Holy Thursday, the 27th of March, 1986, after reportedly winning £800 backing horses. Despite his disappearance, nobody formally reported him missing, and rumours circulated that he had moved to Spain or England. A warrant was issued in January 1987 after he failed to appear in Dublin District Court on a fraud charge. On the 28th of September 1987, Garland's badly decomposed body was discovered in a bog about 40 yards from Killachy Road in the Dublin Mountains, while police were searching for the £10 million paintings stolen by Martin the General Cahill from Rusborough House. He had been shot in the back with a shotgun from less than 7 yards. Early reports described Garland as having fallen foul of Dublin's underworld. There was speculation over Garland's motive for murder. One theory suggested he was killed for stealing money from a gang he worked with through check cashing schemes. Another, widely reported theory pointed to his romantic involvement with the estranged wife of an established criminal in Dublin. Garland had a long-standing relationship with a married woman from Talla, his childhood sweetheart, and prior to his disappearance, he had reportedly been beaten on at least 2 occasions. The woman herself was attacked in her home by 3 masked men around February 1986 and left Talla in September 1987, shortly before Garland's body was discovered. Almost a year after his disappearance, police indicated they believed Garland's murder was financially motivated. Reports stated he had a large sum of money and had cashed thousands of pounds in checks during the final months of his life. Despite an 8-month investigation, the killer was never identified and no charges were brought. The murder of Patrick Garland exemplified the lethal consequences of petty crime intersecting with Dublin's underworld, showing how ambition, money, and personal entanglements could all prove deadly in the city's criminal milieu. Barney Murray lived at 35 Ventry Road, Cabra. On the early morning of 9th August 1986, a group of young men were drinking cider beside a grotto in the playground at Ventry Park. Earlier, 4 youths had stolen a motorbike from outside a flat in the nearby Ratawath estate and dumped it in a field. The motorbike belonged to 20-year-old Eamonn Foy, who went to confront the gang along with 3 friends, Gary R., Tony K., and Stephen D. Foy, a licensed shotgun owner, brought his weapon for protection. At the playground, Foy's group encountered 12 to 13 local youths, including the 4 involved in the motorbike theft. Words were exchanged, and the gang taunted Foy. He pointed his shotgun from the car window and briefly struggled with 2 youths who tried to wrestle the weapon from him. Tensions escalated as stones and bottles were thrown around. Witnesses reported hearing shouts of, "Get him! Get him! He's on his own." Foy fired 2 shots through the railings into the playground. Murray, who had been peering from behind a pillar, was struck in the face and then in the buttock. Another young man, Derek Redmond, was wounded by shotgun pellets in the arm and legs. Both were rushed to hospital, where Murray died of shock and blood loss. Importantly, Murray had not participated in the motorbike theft. He had only been present with the larger group of youths confronted by Foy. Eamonn Foy, a 20-year-old printer from Mellows Avenue, Finglas, was arrested immediately. At his trial in December 1987, the jury found him not guilty of murder, but guilty of manslaughter, resulting in a 3-year prison sentence. A small plaque at Ventry Park commemorates Murray's death. Unlike other killings chronicled during this period, Murray's death was not linked to organised crime, but rather to a violent clash between 2 rival groups of young men in Cabra, illustrating how disputes among local youths could tragically escalate to fatal outcomes. Mel Cox was originally from Elphin, Roscommon. A physically imposing figure, he stood over 6 feet tall and weighed more than 16 stone. A father of 3 young children, he had moved into 71 Cordiff Grove, Blanchardstown, around 1986. Cox worked as a scrap dealer with premises on Store Street and was known locally as a fierce street fighter and eccentric character. The Sunday Tribune on 12th of July 1987 reported that he had once terrorized a neighbor by placing a dead cat in his bed and had publicly butchered a horse in Talla to feed his dogs. Around 20th June 1987, Cox became involved in a brawl in a pub on Summerhill Parade. Accounts vary, but he either broke the jaw of a local criminal or that of a criminal's female relative. This incident would prove to have deadly consequences. 10 days later, on the 30th of June 1987, an unmasked gunman calmly approached Cox while he worked in the back garden of his home and shot him 3 times in the head. Cox's common-law wife witnessed the attack from the living room as she fed their 2-week-old twins. It was later reported in 1996 by the Irish Times that Jerry Hutch, known as the Monk, was the individual whose jaw had been broken in the pub fight, and that he was personally responsible for Cox's murder. The killing of Mel Cox highlighted the lethal consequences of personal grudges in Dublin's criminal underworld, showing how a violent confrontation in a pub could escalate into premeditated murder. Brian Cheney lived at 105 Plunkett Road, Finglas. He had a history of criminal activity, including a 1984 court case linked to an attack on the Barry House pub in Finglas, where a group of youths had pushed several cars against the premises and set them on fire. Cheney and others were acquitted. In August 1987, he was jailed for 18 months for separate offences, attacking a Garda and mugging a man. On 12th September 1988, around midday, Cheney and his brother-in-law Paul White were walking along Cappock Road near Cardiffsbridge Road when a car pulled up and 3 men jumped out. Cheney was attacked with weapons, including a wheel brace, and suffered severe injuries. He was taken to hospital but died 6 days later. Authorities reported that the attack was likely linked to a dispute over drug money among criminal gangs in the Finglas area. A small-time Finglas criminal, Willie Christie, was arrested and charged with Cheney's murder. However, after spending 4 months in custody, the Director of Public Prosecutions dropped the charges due to insufficient evidence. Christie himself was later killed in a gangland shooting in 1990. The death of Brian Cheney illustrated the ongoing lethal consequences of gangland disputes in North Dublin, where arguments over drugs and money frequently turned deadly, and accountability was often limited by lack of witnesses or evidence. Emmanuel Shields, a 34-year-old Catholic civilian from Ballinafay, South Belfast, was shot dead in his bed on the 7th of September 1990. The Ulster Freedom Fighters, the cover name used by the Ulster Defence Association, UDA, claimed responsibility for the killing. Shields was reportedly targeted by the UDA's South Belfast Brigade, led by Joe Bratty, due to previous altercations and intimidation. His family stated that he had been physically attacked by members of Bratty's unit in the past, and that they had fired shots into his mother's house when he lived with her. Shields had a criminal record, but not for Republican activity. His murder was part of a broader pattern of sectarian violence in the area during that period. The UDA's South Belfast Brigade, based in the Annandale Flats area, was responsible for several killings in the early 1990s, including the 1992 Sean Graham Bookmakers Massacre. Bratty's unit, which included figures like Raymond Elder and Stephen Inch McFerrin, was known for its brutal tactics and sectarian attacks. The killing of Emmanuel Shields was one of many during a time of heightened sectarian violence in Northern Ireland, reflecting the deep divisions and tensions that characterised the Troubles. Sonny Mooney was born in 1970 to a black father and a white Irish mother. In 1973, his mother married John Mooney, and the family relocated to Kippure Park, Finglas, in 1975, where John raised Sonny as his own child. A childhood friend recalled Sonny as the only black kid in Finglas South who briefly socialised with the local youth subculture of rude boys, fans of ska and reggae. He was remembered as a likeable fella, though he eventually fell in with a problematic crowd. According to his parents, speaking to the Sunday Tribune on the 19th of May 1991, Sonny had endured racial abuse from an early age, which contributed to him becoming a resilient and capable street fighter by his late teens. Law enforcement described him as a petty criminal, noting convictions for car theft and public order offences. On 3rd March 1990, his sister's boyfriend, Thomas Bulger, also known as Bullet, 20, got into a confrontation with 17-year-old Richard Groves at a local disco. Groves, who kept a horse on nearby waste ground, accused Bulger of mistreating the animal. That evening, Groves claimed Bulger headbutted him and attacked him again on his way home. Returning with a knife, Groves clashed with Bulger, who armed himself with a pole. Bulger was stabbed 5 times and later died. Groves was convicted of manslaughter and received a 5-year suspended sentence. Around September 1990, Sonny Mooney was involved in a violent fight outside a Finglas pub with Stephen Kennedy, which Mooney won. Seamus Duffy, whose sister was dating Kennedy, sought revenge against Mooney. Duffy, who worked as a bouncer in several Dublin nightclubs and fast food outlets, recruited 5 other bouncers to assist in the attack. On the evening of the 8th of October 1990, at approximately 10 p.m, 6 masked men broke into Mooney's home in Kippure Park. They beat him with pickaxe handles in front of his family, forced him into a blue Hiace van, which was later found burned, and then moved him to another vehicle. He was left severely injured at Ballymount Lane, near the junction of Ballymount Road and Greenhills Road. An anonymous call to the police around 11:30 p.m. alerted authorities, and guards found Mooney unresponsive. He died from his injuries. The attackers later claimed they had not intended to kill him. 6 men were arrested and charged with manslaughter. The murder escalated tensions locally, and it was reported in the Sunday Tribune, 19 May 1991, that one of the convicted men, David Butler, was later attacked in Mountjoy Prison by an inmate who had been friends with Sonny Mooney. William Christie, 27, from 12 Barry Drive, Finglas, was a father of 2 and was described in the media as a small-time criminal and cannabis dealer. He reportedly led a minor gang involved in robberies targeting factories and post offices, according to the Sunday Tribune, 21st October 1990. Christie had previously been arrested and charged with the murder of Brian Cheney, but was released after 4 months when the Director of Public Prosecutions dropped the case due to insufficient evidence. On the 8th of September 1990, Christie was playing as goalkeeper for Dublin United FC in a Leinster Junior League match against Parkview Celtic at the 15 acres pitch near St Mary's Hospital in Phoenix Park. After being substituted at half-time, he watched the second half from the sidelines. Around 4:30 p.m, 2 men approached him from behind. One, wearing a balaclava, shot Christie 4 times in the back of the head with a .38 handgun and then passed the weapon to his accomplice, who placed it in a sports bag. Both men fled on foot toward the Chapel Lizard entrance, where authorities believed their getaway car was parked. A spectator with a mobile phone called guards immediately, and Christie was rushed to Blanchardstown Hospital, where he was pronounced dead at 5:15 p.m. Early reports suggested the killing might have been revenge for Brian Cheney's murder, but this theory was quickly dismissed by authorities and the Cheney family. 2 main theories emerged regarding Christie's death. 1, paramilitary involvement. Some reports, including the Sunday Tribune, 21st October 1990, suggested that Christie had publicly threatened a local Republican, which may have led to his targeting by the Provisional IRA. Other sources indicated that he had Republican sympathies, leaving the IRA connection uncertain. The Irish Independent, 20 August 1992, suggested Christie had become embroiled in a dispute with associates of the IRA and may have been earmarked as a target. 2, criminal gang involvement. The Sunday World, 30 December 1990, proposed that a professional hitman, possibly from England, was hired by a Dublin gang or major crime boss to carry out the killing. Subsequent reporting by the Sunday Tribune, 13 October 1991, and the Irish Press, 18 January 1993, suggested the involvement of a senior the Irish People's Liberation Organisation figure or a Dublin heroin dealer. No one was ever charged or convicted. After William's death, his brother Peter Christie faced legal trouble of his own. In July 1991, Peter was sentenced to 2 years in prison for his part in a house robbery in Ashbourne. On the 8th of November 1993, he was abducted from his girlfriend's home in Valeview Crescent, Finglas, by 8 men and later found severely beaten behind a Ballymun tower block. Dessie Fox, a 47-year-old bookmaker from Ireland, was killed on the 30th of September 1990 in a violent attack that remains unsolved. He had planned to attend a race meeting at the Curragh when, while driving to the venue, he was ambushed at Healy's Bridge in prosperous County Kildare. A red Toyota Carina followed him, and the occupants opened fire, damaging his vehicle. When Fox attempted to reverse, he left the road, forcing him to stop. The attackers approached and shot him through the passenger door, hitting his leg and severing a main artery. Fox died within minutes despite being rushed to Blanchardstown Hospital. Investigators believe Fox was specifically targeted because, as a bookmaker, he would often carry large sums of cash. 2 men in the stolen Carina executed the attack, one of whom discarded a Puma cap at the scene. They stole a black leather briefcase containing cash, a canvas money bag, billheads, a Motorola car phone, and car keys. Guards described the incident as a well-planned robbery, likely carried out by an organised gang from the Greater Dublin area. Despite extensive investigation, no arrests were ever made. Friends and family remember Fox as a dedicated family man and a kind, modest individual. Mick Duggan, a friend and neighbour, described him as constantly busy with his work, family and community, while deeply devoted to his wife and 3 daughters. His family has expressed ongoing grief and frustration over the unresolved nature of the case. Lorna Fox O'Mahony, his daughter, recalled the lasting impact of losing her father at age 15 and the sense of closure that remains elusive even decades later. The guards continue to treat the investigation as open, hoping that new information may eventually identify the perpetrators. The case highlights the dangers faced by bookmakers at the time, as well as the profound and lasting impact of violent crime on victims' families. Patrick MacDonald, nicknamed Teasy Weezy, was a 41-year-old former member of the Irish National Liberation Army who was shot and killed on the 20th of December 1991 in Marino, Dublin. At the time, he was working in a hair salon above a bookmaker's shop on St Aidan's Park Road. A lone masked gunman entered the salon while MacDonald was attending to a customer and fired 6 shots into his neck and back. Both the customer and a shop assistant were unharmed, but MacDonald died instantly from the attack. MacDonald had a history of involvement in paramilitary activity. During the 1970s, he was active in the INLA and had been imprisoned for armed robbery before going on the run. In the 1980s, he operated a hair salon in Castleblaney, County Monaghan, and had previously been involved in armed intimidation and car hijacking incidents. After serving most of a 10-year sentence in Portlaoise prison, he was released in 1989 and relocated to Dublin, where he resumed civilian life by running his hairdressing business. The murder of MacDonald was linked to a feud between the Irish People's Liberation Organisation and a North Inner City criminal gang. Several suspects were questioned, but no charges were brought, and the killing remains unsolved. MacDonald was given an Irish National Liberation Army Guard of Honour at his funeral in Newry, County Down, during which members fired a volley of shots as a final salute. Figures from Dublin's criminal underworld, including Tommy the Zombie Savage, were suspected, but no one has ever been held accountable for the murder. Michael Mick Travers, a 48-year-old Dublin man, was fatally shot on the 12th of July, 1992, in the Darndale area of Dublin. At the time, Travers was reportedly involved in a violent altercation with a member of bar staff, resulting in severe facial injuries for the staff member. Despite being advised to compensate the victim, Travers allegedly refused twice, which led to tensions escalating. According to senior guards, this refusal to make amends made Travers a target of the Provisional IRA, who were known to be active in the area during that period. On the day of the murder, Travers was ambushed and shot multiple times by assailants who had been monitoring his movements. The attack was swift and executed with precision, indicating a well-planned operation. Guards believed that Travers had been marked for death due to his failure to settle the dispute, which had drawn the attention of the Provisional IRA. The murder of Mick Travers is considered one of the many gangland killings that occurred in Dublin during the early 1990s. These incidents were often linked to internal feuds within criminal organizations and sometimes involved paramilitary groups enforcing their own form of justice. Despite investigations, the perpetrators of Travers's murder were never apprehended, and the case remains unsolved. Peter Gallagher, a 44-year-old father of 7 from Toomabridge, County Antrim, was murdered on the 24th of March 1993 in West Belfast. As he arrived for work at the Westlink Enterprise Centre on Distillery Street shortly before 8 a.m, a lone gunman approached and shot him multiple times. The Ulster Freedom Fighters, a Loyalist paramilitary group, later claimed responsibility for the attack. Gallagher was a member of Sinn Féin, and his murder was part of a broader campaign of violence against nationalists in the area. The police investigation into Gallagher's murder has been widely criticised. The police ombudsman found that the RUC's handling of the case was wholly inadequate. Despite having intelligence on several individuals linked to the crime, none were arrested. Additionally, surveillance on key suspects was halted just 2 days before the murder, allowing the UFF to carry out the attack without interference. The investigation failed to identify or prosecute those responsible for Gallagher's death. Gallagher's family has long sought justice and accountability for his murder. In 2019, they launched a booklet to remember his life and to highlight the need for a new inquest into his death. The family's efforts have drawn attention to the broader issues of collusion and inadequate investigations into killings during the Troubles. Despite these efforts, no one has been convicted in relation to Peter Gallagher's murder. Michael Godfrey, aged 56, was abducted from his flat on the North Circular Road in Dublin on the night of April 3, 1993. Two masked men forcibly entered his residence and took him away. His body was later discovered in a field near Blanchardstown, having suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head. In April 1993, PJ Judge was implicated in the murder of 56-year-old Michael Godfrey. Godfrey had recently returned to Dublin after serving prison time in Britain. The motive behind the murder was believed to be a dispute over money, highlighting Judge's ruthless approach to settling conflicts within the criminal underworld. On October 28, 1993, brothers Gerard and Rory Cairns were tragically murdered in their home in Bleary, County Armagh, Northern Ireland. The attack occurred shortly after a family celebration for their sister Roisin's 11th birthday. Gunmen from the Ulster Volunteer Force entered the house and shot both brothers in front of their sister. Roisin later recalled how one of the assailants motioned for her to remain silent before the shooting. The Cairns family has long suspected collusion between Loyalist paramilitaries and state forces in the murders. In 2018, convicted UVF member Lawrence Maguire claimed that the attack was part of a broader plan to target the Cairns family, with information allegedly provided by former UVF leader Billy Wright, who had connections with the Royal Ulster Constabulary. Despite these allegations, a 2007 police ombudsman report found no direct evidence of collusion, but criticised the initial police investigation for being brief and flawed. In recent years, the Cairns family has continued to seek justice. In 2025, they welcomed the commencement of court proceedings against an individual charged with conspiring to murder Gerard and Rory Cairns. The family remains committed to uncovering the full truth behind the murders and holding those responsible accountable. Martin the General Cahill was one of Ireland's most infamous criminals, known for his daring robberies and larger-than-life persona. Born in Dublin in 1949, Cahill grew up in poverty and turned to petty crime as a teenager. Over time, he built a powerful criminal empire, orchestrating a series of high-profile heists, including the theft of gold, jewels, and priceless paintings from Russborough House. His ability to outsmart authorities and his flamboyant lifestyle made him both feared and strangely admired within Dublin's criminal underworld. By the early 1990s, Cahill had become one of the most powerful figures in organised crime in Ireland. He led a tight-knit crew and maintained an image of secrecy, rarely photographed and often taunting the guards. Despite his notoriety, Cahill lived openly in Dublin, confident in his ability to evade law enforcement. However, his growing arrogance and involvement in increasingly dangerous circles, including suspected dealings with paramilitary groups, earned him many enemies. On August 18, 1994, Cahill's reign came to a violent end. While driving his car in the Ranelagh area of South Dublin, he was ambushed and shot multiple times through the driver's window by a gunman disguised as a workman. The attacker escaped on a motorcycle, and Cahill died at the scene. The Provisional IRA later claimed responsibility for the killing, accusing Cahill of collaborating with Loyalist paramilitaries and profiting from the conflict in Northern Ireland. Despite multiple investigations, no one was ever charged with his murder. Cahill's death sent shockwaves through Dublin and marked the end of an era in Irish organised crime. His killing exposed the uneasy overlap between criminal networks and paramilitary organisations during the Troubles. In the years that followed, the balance of power in Dublin's underworld shifted, and many of Cahill's associates either fled, were killed, or were absorbed into newer gangs. Michael Crinian, age 35, was shot dead in Cork City in the early hours of the 8th of April 1995, in what guards later described as a gangland-style execution. Crinian, originally from the north side of Cork, was known to local detectives as a man with a history of involvement in serious crime, including armed robbery and suspected drug activity. Though not considered a major criminal figure, he was believed to have ties to both Cork and Dublin criminal networks, and his reputation on the streets suggested he had made enemies in the months leading up to his death. In the hours before the shooting, Crinian had reportedly been socializing in a city centre pub. Witnesses recalled that he seemed agitated and left shortly after midnight. Around 1 a.m, residents in the Fairhill area of Cork were awakened by the sound of gunfire. Crinian's body was later discovered slumped inside his car, parked on a quiet street. He had been shot multiple times at close range, suggesting that his killer, or killers, had waited for him to return home. The firearm used was believed to be a handgun, and the attack bore all the hallmarks of a professional hit. Guards quickly ruled out robbery as a motive. Investigators instead focused on Crinian's criminal associations and possible involvement in disputes over drugs or cash. One line of inquiry suggested that he may have been targeted as part of a power struggle within Cork's small but growing drugs underworld. Others speculated that his murder might have been connected to Dublin criminals seeking to enforce a debt or settle a score. Several individuals known to Crinian were questioned, but no one was ever charged. The murder also exposed the difficulty Gardaí faced in tackling an increasingly organised and ruthless underworld. Despite ongoing investigations and occasional public appeals for information, Michael Crinian's murder remains unsolved. William Jock Corbally, aged 44, was a well-known figure in Dublin's fingerless criminal underworld. On 28 February 1996, he went missing after meeting with associates, sparking immediate concern among guards and the local community. Corbally was suspected of involvement in local drug and gang activity, and his disappearance was soon linked to suspicions that he may have been informing to the Garda. Investigators believe that Corbally was beaten to death with baseball bats and an iron bar by 3 men who accused him of being a Garda informer. The attack is thought to have been carried out with extreme brutality, reflecting the ruthless methods used within Dublin's organised crime scene to enforce discipline and punish perceived betrayal. Despite searches and inquiries, his body was never recovered, leaving the exact circumstances of his death shrouded in uncertainty. Among the suspected perpetrators was P.J. Judge, a prominent fingerless gang leader, who was himself shot dead later that year in December 1996. The involvement of high-profile gang members in Corbally's disappearance highlights the violent internal disputes and mistrust that characterized Dublin's criminal underworld in the 1990s. Garda investigated the case thoroughly, but the secretive nature of the gangland environment made it difficult to obtain evidence. Veronica Guerin, aged 37, was a prominent crime journalist in Ireland, known for her fearless reporting on Dublin's criminal underworld. On 26 June 1996, while waiting at a red light on the Naze dual carriageway in West Dublin, Guerin was shot dead by a gunman riding pillion on a motorbike. The attack was meticulously planned and executed, demonstrating the lengths to which Dublin's organised crime figures would go to silent scrutiny of their activities. Investigations revealed that Guerin's assassination had been ordered by John Gilligan, a major drug dealer from Clondalkin, whose criminal empire had been exposed repeatedly in her reporting. The gunman, Brian Meehan, aged 36, from Crumlin, was subsequently identified as the shooter. He was tried and convicted of murder by the non-jury Special Criminal Court and received a life sentence, marking one of the most high-profile prosecutions connected to Dublin's gangland murders. The murder of Guerin shocked the nation and drew international attention, highlighting the dangers faced by journalists investigating organised crime. It also exposed the scale and audacity of Dublin's drug gangs, who were willing to eliminate anyone threatening their operations. Guerin's death intensified law enforcement efforts against organised crime in Ireland and led to significant reforms in policing and criminal prosecution. Veronica Guerin's legacy endures as a symbol of courage and integrity in journalism. Her assassination galvanized public opinion against gang violence and inspired legislation aimed at dismantling criminal networks. P.J. Judge, aged 41 and widely known in the media as Psycho, was shot dead while sitting in his car in Finglas, North Dublin on the 8th of December 1996. Judge was a notorious figure in Dublin's criminal underworld, known for his involvement in armed robbery, drug dealing, and violent disputes with rival gangs. His reputation for unpredictable and aggressive behavior earned him both fear and notoriety among associates and enemies alike. On the day of the killing, Judge was parked in his car when gunmen approached and opened fire. Witnesses reported hearing several shots, after which Judge was found fatally wounded inside the vehicle. The precision and execution of the attack suggested that the killers had detailed knowledge of his routines and intended to eliminate him in a swift, targeted manner. Guards immediately treated the shooting as a professional gangland-style execution. Investigators focused on several potential motives, including disputes over drugs, criminal debts, and rivalries within Dublin's underworld. Media reports and law enforcement sources indicated that his own gang with members like Martin Marlowe Hyland were the main suspects, although no arrests or convictions were ever made. Mark Dwyer, aged 23, was abducted, tortured, and shot in the head before being dumped in a field in Finglas, North Dublin, on the 13th of December, 1996. Dwyer was reportedly involved in the Dublin drug scene and had been blamed by his associates for a missing consignment of ecstasy tablets imported from Amsterdam. His death was a brutal example of gangland enforcement within the city's criminal underworld, where disputes over drugs could quickly turn lethal. On the day of the murder, Dwyer was lured from his home and taken to a remote location in Finglas. Witnesses later described that he had been subjected to a violent assault, including torture, before being executed with a gunshot to the head. His body was then abandoned in a field, highlighting the cold and calculated nature of the attack. Guards treated the killing as a premeditated execution linked directly to criminal disputes. Investigators soon focused on individuals connected to the ecstasy consignment and the wider Finglas drug network. The investigation led to the arrest of Joseph Delaney, aged 54, who was later tried and convicted for Dwyer's murder. Delaney received a life sentence, reflecting the severity of the crime and the guards' determination to bring those responsible for gangland executions to justice. Patrick "Paddy" Farrell, aged 30, was a prominent cross-border drug dealer from Newry, known for his extensive involvement in the Irish drug trade. He operated across both the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, reportedly laundering money through legitimate businesses such as car sales while maintaining connections with various criminal networks. Farrell had a reputation as one of the country's largest drug traffickers, making him a high-profile figure in Ireland's criminal underworld during the 1990s. On the 10th of September 1997, Farrell was at the home of his girlfriend, Lorraine Farrell, in County Louth. In a shocking turn of events, Lorraine shot Paddy in the bedroom of her house. The exact circumstances surrounding why she carried out the shooting remain unclear, with speculation ranging from personal disputes to issues related to Farrell's criminal activities. Following the attack on Paddy, Lorraine turned the weapon on herself. Both were discovered dead at the scene. Farrell's death not only removed a major figure from the cross-border drug trade, but also highlighted the volatile mix of personal and professional pressures faced by people involved in organized crime. The incident prompted law enforcement to investigate possible motives, though it was difficult to separate personal conflict from potential gang-related tensions. Raymond McCord Jr., aged 24, was a young man from Newtown Abbey, County Antrim, in Northern Ireland. He became widely known in the mid-1990s, not for his own criminal activities, but because of his involvement in exposing Loyalist paramilitary violence. His father, Raymond McCord Sr., had been a campaigner against the Ulster Volunteer Force following the murder of his stepson by Loyalist paramilitaries, and McCord Jr.'s death would tragically echo the same cycle of sectarian and gang-related violence. On the 9th of November 1997, McCord Jr. was shot dead outside his home in Newtown Abbey. He had been targeted by members of the UVF, one of Northern Ireland's notorious Loyalist paramilitary groups. Reports indicated that he had been deliberately singled out, likely due to his outspoken stance and family's activism against Loyalist criminality. The killing was carried out in a brutal execution-style manner, leaving the local community shocked and fearful of further retaliatory violence. The murder of Raymond McCord Jr. highlighted the persistent influence of paramilitary groups in Northern Ireland during the late 1990s, even as the peace process was beginning to take shape. Loyalist gangs often exercised violent control over their communities, targeting those who spoke out against them, and McCord Jr.'s death underscored the risks faced by families challenging paramilitary authority. It also drew attention to ongoing concerns about the lack of accountability and the culture of intimidation that shielded such groups. Following his death, McCord Sr. intensified his campaign against the UVF and the collusion between paramilitaries and local authorities. The case became a focal point for discussions about paramilitary violence, justice, and reform in Northern Ireland. Despite investigations, no one was successfully prosecuted for the murder. Gerard Moran, aged 35, was a petty criminal operating in Dublin, known for his involvement in minor offences and local disputes. While not a major figure in the city's gangland scene, Moran's criminal connections and personal rivalries placed him in a vulnerable position within Dublin's volatile underworld. His name had occasionally appeared in Garda reports, marking him as someone involved in ongoing tensions and conflicts in the north of the city. On 21 November 1997, Moran was shot dead in Drumcondra, North Dublin. The attack appeared to be carefully executed, with the gunman targeting him in a public area, reflecting the personal nature of the dispute rather than a random act of violence. Witnesses noted the suddenness and precision of the shooting, which left Moran fatally wounded at the scene. Guards immediately launched an investigation into the killing, treating it as a premeditated act linked to personal grievances. Investigators considered former members of the Provisional IRA as potential suspects, suggesting that the murder may have been connected to long-standing local feuds or personal vendettas, rather than broader gangland rivalries. The involvement of ex-IRA figures in such killings was not uncommon in Dublin at the time, particularly when disputes required violent enforcement outside formal gang structures. Despite Garda inquiries, no arrests or convictions were ever made in Moran's case. The murder remains officially unsolved. Martin Nolan, aged 34, was a known figure in Dundalk, County Louth, with ties to local criminal activity. While not as notorious as some major Dublin gangsters, Nolan was involved in petty crime and disputes within the local underworld, which made him a target for retaliation by rival criminals. On 13th March 1998, Nolan was shot dead in Dundalk. The killing was swift and deliberate, reflecting the precision often associated with gangland-style executions. Garda treated the incident as a targeted murder, likely connected to criminal disputes rather than random violence. Witnesses reported the presence of assailants who carried out the attack with clear intent, highlighting the risks faced by those involved in organized crime. Investigators examined Nolan's local criminal associations and rivalries, exploring whether the shooting was linked to unpaid debts, personal disputes, or broader gang tensions in the Louth area. Despite inquiries and appeals for information, the investigation faced challenges due to the secretive nature of the local criminal networks. No arrests or convictions were recorded in connection with Nolan's murder. His death remains unsolved. Thomas Lockard, aged 34, was involved in criminal activity in County Louth and had connections with local underworld figures. His associations and disputes with other criminals put him at significant risk, as conflicts over money, territory, or loyalty often escalated to extreme violence in the region. On 27th of April 1998, Lockard was abducted by his criminal associates. He was subjected to a brutal torture session before being stabbed to death. The severity and method of the killing indicate it was intended both as punishment and a warning to others within the criminal network. Following the murder, his body was left on a roadside, a grim display characteristic of gangland enforcement tactics. Investigators focused on Lockard's network of associates, attempting to establish motives related to disputes, debts, or betrayals within the Louth underworld. The violent nature of the killing suggested that those responsible were familiar with him and intended to make a clear statement to the criminal community. Witnesses and local intelligence provided limited information, reflecting the fear and code of silence prevalent among those involved in organised crime. No arrests or convictions were ever made in connection with Lockard's death. The murder remains unsolved. Patrick Campbell, aged 22, a member of the Irish National Liberation Army, was killed on the 6th of October 1999 in Walkinstown, South Dublin. During a violent confrontation at an industrial estate, Campbell was struck with a machete, sustaining severe injuries that caused him to bleed to death. The attack was sudden and brutal, marking a deadly escalation in ongoing disputes between paramilitary and criminal groups in the area. The incident involved a group of criminals from southwest Dublin, and it is believed the confrontation arose from a mix of personal and territorial disputes, intersecting with Campbell's paramilitary affiliations. His death underscored the volatile nature of interactions between organised crime figures and paramilitary members during this period, where even minor conflicts could quickly become lethal. In the aftermath of Campbell's death, a wave of retaliatory killings unfolded over subsequent years. Several men connected to the original confrontation or suspected of involvement were targeted in revenge attacks, illustrating the cycle of violence that often followed high-profile murders within Dublin's criminal underworld. Despite investigations and efforts to bring those responsible to justice, no arrests were ever made in connection with Campbell's killing. His death, along with the subsequent revenge attacks, reflected the deep-seated tensions and brutal methods that characterized interactions between paramilitary groups and criminal networks in late 1990s Dublin.